higher rates for longer.
The 5-day in-office work week is effectively dead.
It's definitely a good sign that we're not ready to land this economy just yet.
This is Bloomberg Markets with Paul Sweeney and Matt Miller on Bloomberg Radio.
All right, it has been a Washington, D.C. kind of news-centric kind of day today, and that's set to continue. We're waiting for President Biden. He's going to speak. He's scheduled to speak at noon on Wall Street time. We'll see when that happens, but we will bring that to you. He'll be speaking about the funding bills, including funding for Ukraine and Israel. So when he has those comments, we will bring them to you. Want some analysis of that as well. But first, let's kick things off with Charlie Peller.
All right, thank you very much, Paul Sweeney. We've got the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ all back in the green right now. Stocks have paired gains that were driven by bets the Fed will cut rates next year. Oil sank below $70 a barrel amid oversupply concerns. S&P little changed, higher now by 2 points, up less than 0.1%. Dow Industrials up 14. That is a gain of less than 0.1% as well. Little changed. NASDAQ up 13 right now, a gain of 0.1%. 10-year yield 4.11%. We have got the 2-year yielding 4.60%. Spot gold right now up $10 the ounce to $2,029, up by about 0.5%. Bitcoin just under 44,000, 43,907 on Bitcoin, and West Texas Intermediate crude at 69.40 a barrel, down now by 4%. As we have been reporting, and as you've heard live here on Bloomberg Radio, bank CEOs, including the heads of J.P. Morgan Chase, Citigroup, Morgan Stanley, and Goldman Sachs, all in Washington today, voicing opposition to new regulations proposed by the Biden administration that could hit their profitability hard. Sri Natarajan is following the story for Bloomberg News, and he was a guest this morning right here on Bloomberg Markets.
Jamie Dimon's comments clearly a shot at the regulators said there is a climate in Washington where you propose first and study later. Not just Jamie Dimon, everyone else there with him in Washington today, all those CEOs are making the point that regulators are putting in place onerous new requirements that just don't make sense.
And you can hear more of the conversation on the Tape podcast. You can download it wherever you get your podcasts. J.P. Morgan Chase shares, they're down now by 0.4%. Other banks, though, are advancing. Goldman Sachs up by 0.8%. Morgan Stanley up 0.5. Citigroup shares, they're up now by 3.9%. Again, recapping, we do have stocks trading mixed. Right now, we have got the S&P little change. It is up by 1 point. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Charlie Pello, thank you so much. We appreciate that. Simone Foxman, Paul Sweeney. We're live here in our Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio. We're also streaming live on YouTube, so you can head over to youtube.com and search Bloomberg Radio, and you can find us there. President Biden, he delivers remarks urging Congress to pass his national security supplemental request, including funding to support Ukraine. He has some comments scheduled for 12 noon today Eastern. We'll bring them to you when they happen. Let's get a little bit of a preview here, because there's a lot going on in Washington. We've been totally ripping up the script, as Tom Keene would say. Joe Matthew, he is our go-to voice for Bloomberg Radio and Television down in Washington, D.C. He joins us, as does Mick Mulroy, co-founder of the Lobo Institute and former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Middle East at the U.S. Department of Defense, former U.S. Marine Infantry officer for 16 years. We thank him, of course, for his service. Joe, let's start with you. McCarthy, what do you make of it? I know you're going to tell me that you guys down in D.C. were expecting it. Simone and I totally were not.
Yeah, it took us by surprise.
Totally by surprise.
No,
so what does it mean
I won't
to you?
go that far, by the way. By the way, I'm bouncing back if we can fix that. But I know it's got to be a heck of a day if you call me twice
yes.
in one day. But, yeah, look, there were questions about what he was going to do because he had not announced his plans for re-election. And so a little bit difficult. Sorry about that. Not a massive shocker knowing he had not announced his plans. Thank you for that. But the timing is what blew me away. Gone by the end of the year? That's a lot different than saying you're not going to run for re-election. And following yesterday's news, Patrick McHenry, the chair of the Financial Services Committee, who was acting speaker, remember he was slamming the gavel in anger just a couple of months ago, or I guess it was weeks at this point. He just announced that he's leaving the House as well. So you put these two together, and it's two major retirements/resignations for the Republican conference in the House, and it tells us a lot about the chaos that we've been seeing.
Mick, Does this have any impact on the overall discussions that we expect to see happen and negotiations we expect to see happen both around Ukraine aid as well as aid for Israel?
Yes, I think it does, actually. I think a lot of the people that are retiring are people that, at least initially, were very supportive of Ukraine aid in the role that the United States has played in getting the world together to get behind them. So as you see these individuals get replaced, the concern will be that they're going to be more inclined with, I guess, the far right of the Republican Party that's now sees this as something that we shouldn't be doing. I obviously would disagree with that, but I think these shifts may have an impact. You're already seeing it, and you're also seeing, and I've been up there to brief many fence sitters, if you will. You're also seeing them say that as we get closer to the election, that this is going to be even harder to pass, this $100+ billion in support to Ukraine. So the quicker we can do this, the better. And before a lot of these individuals are replaced is also a good thing.
Hey, Mick, we're still waiting comments from President Biden about the funding, including Ukraine. Give us your updated view of how critical additional funding for Ukraine is, because it's, quite frankly, and unfortunately for them, the events in Israel have kind of taken Ukraine off the front page. Just give us an update from your perspective.
That's a good point. I haven't talked about Ukraine in over a month, so that should say something. I do think, we have to remember this is somewhat of a David and Goliath type scenario. We forgot that. But if you go back to the beginning of when Russia invaded, everybody expected this to be over in weeks and Kyiv to fall and everything. Look where we are now, where it's a counteroffensive for the Ukrainians. Yes, it has stalled. Yes, it's very difficult, but it's an entirely different situation. And part of that is because of the support that's come to them from Europe and from the United States, with the United States being the leader in that. If we fail to support them, this $100 billion plus dollars, they're going to be in a serious situation. This is largely a war of attrition now. It's in inches. But Ukraine is on the offense, and it really needs the munitions to be able to take on and go into the defenses that Russians have built over many, many months before this counteroffensive started. If we pull out now, that is a big problem for the Ukrainians. This could then start, the tide could start turning, and we could see the Russians start gaining ground.
Oh, boy. All right, here's just a quote today from President Zelensky of Ukraine. Quote, "We have a realistic action strategy, and it is our efforts with your support that can ensure Ukraine's success on the ground," Zelensky said in a speech to G7 leaders, including President Joe Biden, during a virtual meeting Wednesday.
Yeah, Joe, what's your sense of how much political support that can be drawn up for Ukraine? Because it does seem like when if you look across the majorities of these two chambers, probably if you could just put the resolution on the floor, they'd get passed. But who can be pulled on the fence?
What you just said is correct. If you put Ukraine funding on the floor of the House, we already saw it happen with standalone Israel funding, it would pass, and it would pass with bipartisan support. The question is procedure in this case, and exactly what the Speaker of the House can get away with a fractured conference. Look, Kevin McCarthy just left for a reason. Mike Johnson has to figure out a way around this here. He says that he supports getting this done. He does not want to do it, by the way, all in one pop, this more than $100 billion request that President Biden made. He wants to have bills on Israel, Ukraine, Taiwan separately on the floor, and he wants Ukraine tied to border funding, border security, changes in asylum law, something that has eluded lawmakers for decades. The prospect of getting that done in the next couple of weeks is not looking really great, which is why it's likely this is going to turn into something next year. The White House says they're out of time, they're out of money. But until this can be taken care of on the border, something that Republicans and Democrats can swallow, it's not likely going to happen.
Hey, Mick, probably a week or so ago, we spoke with Admiral Stavridis, former head of NATO, and he made a point. He had just returned from a trip to South Korea, and he felt like what probably and is likely to happen in Ukraine is some type of trade land for peace, much like it happened in Korea. Is that a scenario now that it appears that it's become more of a kind of drawn-out situation here militarily?
Yes, I think the Admiral's right. I think that is something that will be looked at and probably is already being looked at. But ultimately, it's going to be up to the Ukrainian people. President Zelensky said he's going to need a referendum when it comes to giving any land away. But there needs to be something in return. And I think that will be, of course, peace, but also potentially NATO membership. If I was in their shoes, I wouldn't want to give any territory away unless I had absolute assurances, security-wise, that this wasn't going to happen again. And one way to do that is to get into NATO, which, of course, then gives them the Article 5 protection if they're ever attacked again. So I don't know where that stands right now, but I know that those discussions are ongoing. And as this, to your point of your question, as this goes into this kind of stalemate, it's going to be more and more likely, because a stalemate means nobody's really gaining a lot. Doesn't mean people aren't dying. And so it is still incumbent on both sides to look at what they can do to end this in a way that's at least acceptable to both countries.
Are the Ukrainians optimistic that at any point that there can be a sort of breakthrough, an end to the stalemate? I know that, throughout the spring and the summer, there were moments where they said, yes, in the next couple of weeks. But has that kind of optimism gone away?
So I don't think the optimism has gone away from the Ukrainian people. I think they're in it to the end. There was just one story that was out there about the Ukrainian soldier that called in all of the artillery on his own position because he was about to be overrun, and of course killed all the Russian troops that were about to overrun his positions. But those kind of things really indicate to me, as somebody spent a lot of time in conflicts, people that do that don't generally lose wars. They'll go to the end. And I think that's what really is that kind of power that the Ukrainian people have, is they are tenacious and they're never going to give up. And the Russian people, I think, realize that. They've lost they've lost more people in this conflict than we lost in Vietnam, if you think about the time difference in that. Yeah. So this is something that I think really is that factor that you can't duplicate, you can't buy. It's ingrained in the Ukrainian people to keep fighting. I do think once the summer hits again, and all the weapon systems that we've provided, and a lot of the advanced ones that we're training them on now, like the F-16, they will start gaining some terrain. So Russia's going to be very concerned when all that comes together, and they really start pushing in the spring.
Can we shift to the conflict in the Middle East now? Israel appearing to draw some criticism, increasing criticism, I would say, from the Biden administration. We saw some restrictions on visas for Israeli settlers involved in violence in the West Bank come into play yesterday. How much of a divide or how much criticism truly is the Biden administration placing on Israel? And, is it truly intensifying, or are these just little bits and pieces that we see?
So I do think it's intensifying. I think at first, and still today, the United States is the most significant partner to Israel. And I think any country that was attacked like they were on October 7th would have as their objective to destroy the entity that did that, in this case, Hamas. So militarily degrade them to a point where they're not combat effective. But the way they went about it, especially in the shaping part of this operation, the shaping phase, where it was significant bombing in areas to essentially destroy tunnels, but they're in urban areas that brought down multiple buildings at the same time. That's why we're seeing this level of civilian casualties up to 15,000, 16,000 now. I think at first that was all said behind the scenes. Now you're seeing more and more public statements that they expect Israel to shift tactics so they can reduce the amount of civilian casualties, because this is just not acceptable in their view, and many military analysts' view, but also a need to address the humanitarian catastrophe that's happening right now, because they can't get enough humanitarian aid into Gaza. So I think you'll see the United States, of course, stick with our partner in Israel and their objective, but also really push them to do it in a manner that doesn't completely alienate them from the rest of the world and make our job in supporting them more difficult.
So, I mean, in terms of that objective, which was originally stated by Israel, complete annihilation of Hamas, is that even in practicality possible? I mean, how do you eradicate a terrorist organization? It's not like, defeating an army of a state. So does that need to be rethought?
Yes, especially if you put it as eliminate Hamas, right? So we, at the CIA, I spent 20 years there. All my colleagues, all the military, we spent 20 years trying to defeat Al-Qaeda and its offshoots, right? You can't defeat a philosophy. In fact, oftentimes if you're heavy-handed, you create more of the problem. What they're trying to do, and I think when you get into talking to the IDF seniors, which I do, they're trying to destroy their military capacity. They realize the philosophy itself is not something that can be destroyed, but to reduce their weapons stashes, their especially precision guidance, their soldiers, their leadership, capture their leadership, and destroy these tunnels, which gives them a lot of military advantages. That's what they're really trying to do. I don't think anybody there thinks that they're going to destroy the ideology and that either Hamas or something like Hamas isn't going to continue. They just want to reduce the threat to its manageable. And then the question is going to be what comes next? Because if the international community doesn't come up with some kind of security and stabilization force that's acceptable to both, then the IDF is going to have to stay there long term. And that's going to be a lot of international pressure to change that.
All right, Mick, thanks so much for joining us. Mick Mulroy, he is co-founder of the Lobo Institute. He is absolutely our go-to voice on so many of these geopolitical issues, given his experience at the U.S. Department of Defense, CIA, the United States Marine Corps. I mean, the guy's done everything, so we really appreciate getting a few minutes of his time. All right, let's get back to the banks. Down in Washington, D.C. today, the CEOs speaking and testifying in front of the U.S. Senate Banking Committee. Lots of issues there. There's also a big financial services conference, the Goldman Sachs Bank Conference, that's moving stocks here, too. So let's get back to discussion of the banks here. Chris Whalen is at Whalen Global Advisors. He knows a thing or two about these banks. Chris, let's just start with the testimony down in Washington, D.C. What do the banks really want as it relates to this latest round of potential regulation?
I think they want to kill it, delay it, and force the Fed and the other regulators to do their homework. You know, as Jamie Dimon alluded and several others alluded, Senator Kennedy, there's no prior art for this analytical framework that's in this rule. They didn't do the work. And this breaks the process, that we've had with Basel going back 20 years and more. It says, we're going to test it, we're going to argue about it, we're going to publish it so we can see all the work, and then we're going to adopt it. They're not doing that. And this is part and parcel of what you see throughout the Biden administration in many areas, like housing, where I spend most of my time, where they come up with these crazy ideas that are clearly unworkable, but they're doing it for political reasons. For example, they want lenders to use 2 different credit scores now for lending. It's arithmetically impossible. And so the FHFA, which regulates Fannie and Freddie, told them to average to 2 scores, which is crazy. But that's what we're dealing with now. So you guys at Bloomberg understand what's involved when you start mucking around with credit scores in the world of fixed income. That's not a trivial thing, but the Biden people are going for it because they want talking points. You can see that Sherrod Brown is having a tough time politically.
Yeah, exactly.
He spent 5 minutes talking about the TV ads about Basel. Can you imagine?
Right. Exactly. So, all right, we're waiting.
That is.
We're waiting. President Biden, he's going to be scheduled to make some comments shortly on the aid package to Ukraine. When he does come, we will bring those to you.
You were talking, Chris, about sort of the unworkability of some of these proposals. But, haven't we seen European regulators do something quite similar? Where are the differences here? And where is there potentially room for a compromise between the banks themselves and between regulators?
Well, the European situation, Simone, is very different because you don't have middle market banking in Europe. The governments take all that business. So the big banks basically are banking larger corporations, government entities, and then they go offshore and they compete with Citi, for example, in other markets. So their approach to things like housing is they don't like housing. They don't like the idea of single-family homes. So the Basel rule from years ago reflects that. The U.S. missed that one, and it was unfortunate. Now they're going after it even more, things like mortgage servicing rights. I don't think the 2 perspectives are really compatible at the end of the day. The Europeans treat business, treat banks as second-class citizens, and they don't even think about, starting new banks and that sort of thing. In the U.S., our bond market has been our strength. the fact that we have private credit markets. And, you know, our banks still are very important players in that, but they're much less involved. You know, I doubt many people on the Senate Banking Committee realize that 80% of all residential mortgages today are underwritten and serviced by non-banks.
So, Chris,
banks,
that's an area I wanted to go to. Private credit. It's now a $1.5 trillion business that kind of sprang up right after the great financial crisis. Now the concerns seem to be when people are getting concerned about the lack of transparency, the lack of regulation from that market. Could you give us your thoughts there?
Yeah, Jamie Dimon and the other witnesses alluded to this, which is that more than half of the private credit market is now conducted by non-banks. These are funds, these are other types of entities, REITs, that are not particularly transparent. You know, when a private REIT, for example, calculates net asset value, there's no rule for how they do that. So, you know, to say the least, it's hard to judge what's going on inside these entities, and the banks finance them. So that's why a couple of the witnesses referred specifically to that and said, do you want more of that? And that's the real question before both the Senate and the bank regulators. Do you really want to go down this road? Because the capital rates are so punitive that no U.S. large bank would want to be in residential mortgage at all. Think about that. No condo loans. You know, that's largely a big bank market. The little banks don't do much business there.
But, you know, at the same time, stability within the broader financial system, this was always one of the arguments by hedge funds and private equity firms that, you know, well, banks shouldn't be in some of this business. We're pulling some of the risk out of, you know, the financial system.
And I agree with that. Operationally, we want non-banks to take care of mortgages. They're much better at it, much better, orders of magnitude more efficient. And it's good to have the commercial banks as the lenders. They're essentially the gatekeepers, right? But you and I both know that if a money market fund or a REIT rolled over, the government would intervene. This is why the Fed was doing $2 trillion of reverse repos a year ago. They essentially had to come in and save the money market funds from getting zeroed out when T-bills were very low. Today, that problem's reversed itself, and Yellen's issuing a lot of T-bills to facilitate that, right? But long term, I think the non-bank sector is going to have to live with interest rates like everybody else. And I think the long end of the curve will be higher than it is today. It's going to normalize.
Right.
That'll be a different world for non-banks, particularly because they fund in the bond market. Unless you're a REIT and you can sell stock, most other non-banks have to put out high-yield term debt to raise capital. And then the banks do all the secured financing for them. So if you're a fund, whatever it is, right?
Right.
So, you know, and it's such an important part of the economy. I like the partnership with the banks doing the wholesale work. I think it's better for them.
Okay.
They don't want to face consumers. No.
All right, Chris. Thanks so much for joining us. Chris Whalen, chairman of Whalen Global Advisors. Right now, let's get a reset here. Charlie Pellet from Bloomberg Business.
Thank you very much. And here's what's going on. Choppy session. S&P just turning negative once again, down by half a point. Little change. That is the key takeaway. As of 12:23 Wall Street time, we've got the Dow up 3 now. Also little changed, up less than 0.1%. NASDAQ holding on to a 13-point gain, up by about 0.1%. 10-year yield 4.10% with that 2-year at 4.58%. Spot gold up $8 the ounce at 2,027, up 0.4%. Crude dropping 4.4%. Certainly a story we'll be watching here. WTI now at 69.14 a barrel. Briefly, bank stocks very much in focus. Chris Whalen just talking about that. J.P. Morgan Chase down 0.6%. Goldman up 0.5%. Morgan Stanley little change, down less than 0.1%. And Citigroup surging now by 3.4%. Recapping, move lower for the U.S. equity market. S&P little change, down now by 1 point. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie Pellet, thank you so much. We appreciate it. Simone Foxman, Paul Sweeney. We're live here in our Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio. We're also streaming live on YouTube, so you can go over to youtube.com and check it out. I tell you, what a 4, 5, 6 weeks it's been in these markets. The narrative has really changed, Simone, to just like, we've seen peak rates. Let's go. I mean, it's odd how quickly it's changed.
Yeah, you saw this 8.9% surge in the S&P 500 last month, and then the last 3 days have been meh.
Yeah, exactly. But I don't know, my personal Paul Sweeney inflation gauge is a daily national average gasoline price, $3.21. It has been going down every single day. And as Charlie Putt was just saying, we've got WTI crude oil below 70, just above $69 a barrel. So big move there. Where do we go from here? Let's talk to somebody who does this for a living. Quincy Crosby. She's the chief global strategist for LPL Financial. She joins us. Quincy, what do you make of the last 4 or 5 weeks? That was a heck of a November for all these markets.
Well, it was. And what the beautiful part of it is how perverse the markets can be, because what happened was we were in October, and by the time we got to the end of October, nobody believed in seasonality. Nobody believed in November or December seasonality. Nobody believed that this market could actually enjoy an important rally. And then on November 1st, almost like clockwork, we get the Treasury announcement, which was positive for the markets in terms of funding needs, a little bit lower. And then the Fed at that afternoon meeting, right after the Treasury announcement, for the market interpreting it as a dovish pivot, that they're finished. Then added to all of this is the most important narrative, and that is that the market is convinced that the Fed is going to cut rates, even as early as March. This part of that narrative is, I think, completely what the market is focused on. However, when we see these yields coming down, we always look at the pace of a direction, how quick or how slow. It has been very fast, coming from 5% on October 19th all the way down to today. It's been very quick. How about that? It is screaming a difficult economy, a difficult backdrop, perhaps a cry for help from the Federal Reserve, which is sticking to its narrative. No, we're not going to cut rates. The market is saying you're wrong, and you know it. And so it's going to be interesting to see what the Fed has to say next week.
Well, we have, before we get to next week, a big week of economic data culminating with the jobs report. Yeah. And we have very disparate signals coming through. Is the data bad enough to warrant some of what we're seeing in interest rate swaps, the Fed cuts next year, or are investors getting ahead of themselves?
Well, they're probably getting ahead of themselves. But again, when you look at the Treasury market and you see the rates coming down that quickly, it typically is underpinned by a growth scare. I mean, you don't usually see rates coming down that quickly. When rates moved up dramatically to 5%, Chairman Janet Yellen said, well, the term premium, it is based on the fact that the economy is so strong. Well, now that we're going in the other direction, Dr. Yellen, I wonder what she has to say now about how strong the backdrop is.
Wait, hold up, though. Going in the other direction, we saw, wasn't third quarter GDP 5.2% annualized? Are we truly going in the other direction?
Well, right now, the same forecaster, the Atlanta Fed GDP now, that had it almost nailed at 5.2% for the third quarter, is looking at 1.3% right now. Of course, Friday is going to make an important difference in terms of what it has for December. But the fact is, it's not a recession. It may not be stellar, but it's not a recession. But again, this persistence of the market saying the Fed is going to cut rates, it doesn't end. In fact, if anything, it's been intensifying.
All right, so Quincy, it's December. It's time to start looking towards the year ahead here. What are you telling your clients about 2024?
Well, our view is that, first of all, to end this year, we like the fact that we're seeing some consolidation, even though it's this meandering between positive and negative territory. It's moving sideways. That's pretty healthy. It should lead us to a rally toward the end of the year. However, we don't want it to be completely overbought going into next year, because that sets the stage for more of a market pulling back. As the market figures out, how is the economy growing? Is it slowing too much? At this stage, it's still a question mark. We're still in positive territory in terms of GDP forecasts. So we're looking at quality. Actually, we're looking at large cap growth. And we think that is the place to be, particularly if you're in companies that have strong balance sheets. That's how we're looking at the beginning of next year. We do think a recession may hit. It could be a technical recession, just as we had over a year ago. But the fact is we do see a slowdown and then a move climb higher. Remember, though, the market is a discounting mechanism. It looks ahead, months ahead. And that's why sometimes the market at this stage looks as if it's not in sync with what the Treasury market is doing.
We may have to jump to President Biden in a second, but we were marveling earlier at the Russell 2000, the only index that's actually moving today, up 0.8%. Are you seeing breath coming back into this market in 2024?
Well, most likely we will, unless the market and the backdrop is very weak, because we know that what happens is the market narrows and the money goes into those big mega tech names because they are seen as defensives. The Russell 2000, I watch it as a bellwether because I'll tell you, as soon as it believes that the economy is slowing too much, that market just pulls right back down. It is granular. It is probably the most important bellwether of the economy, the real economy that we have, but it will move quickly. And so I think it's great that it's moving higher because at this point, it's suggesting that the economic backdrop remains constructive. The banks, 20% is banks, 20% industrials, and you've got biotechs in there. The banks are moving, and that's why they're moving higher, because rates are coming down, but the economy is still solid, according to the Russell 2000. That will probably change as we move into a more difficult environment in 2024 as the market absorbs still the higher rates.
You know, it's interesting, Quincy, just another part of the market that's just been running all over the place is the energy market. WTI crude oil is down 4.2% today. We're now below $70 a barrel. I mean, I've said it once, I'll say it again. I'm so glad I could never be a oil trader. The volatility would just crush me. What do you make about the energy space? I mean, is it too much volatility for you to look at, or how do you guys think about that?
No, we look at it, and having worked in it, I actually enjoy this. There's trouble in the OPEC plus cartel in their oil patch. Obviously, they couldn't come out with a deal, an announcement, but nonetheless, the companies make money. The cash flow is strong. But the fact is, here in the United States, I'm getting $2.99, by the way, in Charlottesville, Virginia. You got to come down here to fill out. Really nice. But the point here is, America is producing more oil, 13 million barrels a day. It's a record. That's not good. You want to see a pullback. Now, the thing I worry about, by the way, is the Saudis have done this in the past. Flood the market with oil in order to push out our producers. They've done this in the past. I don't think they would do it now. What they really want are deeper cuts and have it co-join with Russia and the African states and come out with a very strong production cut. Remember, they need about $78 a barrel, even though it's not much to get the oil out and refine it, because they have a very large benefit program, welfare program, and then they're building cities. They need higher oil prices. And I wouldn't put it past them to try to negotiate a very deep, not voluntary, but a very deep production cut, not flood the market with oil to get us out. But they've done it before. I don't think they'll do it again.
Yeah, and I should mention for our listeners here, Quincy is a former U.S. diplomat and was posted as an energy attaché at the U.S. Embassy in London. So interesting perspective there. How does cheaper prices at the pump play out for the American consumer, which many companies have been calling out as a little bit constrained at this point?
Well, absolutely. It helps, but here is one of the most fascinating parts of this. You would think that U.S. consumer expectations of future inflation would come down based on the lower oil prices, because there's a very high positive correlation between the consumer, gasoline prices, and by the way, how they look at the administration. However, what we saw in the last University of Michigan Consumer Confidence Report, the component that looks at future inflation, Americans came out and said, well, we acknowledge that inflation has come down, but we expect it to climb higher. The Fed does not want to see this because what happens is the psychology becomes intact. It becomes unanchored, actually, from the Fed's standpoint. And it is fascinating because last time go around, when the Strategic Petroleum Reserve was pushed out into the tanks, Americans said inflation is coming down, and even Biden's approval ratings actually ticked up, but not this time.
All right, Quincy, thank you so much once again for taking some time to chat with us. Quincy Crosby, Chief Global Strategist for LPL Financial. Right now, let's head down to Washington, D.C. We've got world and national news with Nancy Lyons.
Thanks, Paul. We are waiting to hear from President Biden. He is expected to deliver remarks shortly in which he's expected to urge Congress to pass his national security supplemental request that includes aid to Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan. We'll bring you those remarks once they begin. Well, he was the first House Speaker to be kicked out of the position by his own members. Now Kevin McCarthy is taking himself out of the House entirely.
The Republican from Bakersfield, California, made the announcement in a Wall Street Journal essay and on this video posted on X.
While I'll be departing the House at the end of this year, I will never, ever give up fighting for this country that I love so much.
McCarthy came to office in 2010 with a wave of Tea Party Republicans. It took 15 votes for him to become Speaker in January, a tenure that lasted just 9 months when 8 conservatives joined with Democrats to kick him out of the chair. In Washington, I'm Nathan Hager, Bloomberg Radio.
Global news 24 hours a day, whenever you want it, with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Nancy Lyons.
All right, Nancy Lyons, thank you so much. We appreciate that. Let's bring in Michael McKee. He is our head economist kind of guy in international stuff. I don't know what it's
International and economics policy correspondent. I have it written down
Thank you.
here. Essentially, he covers everything, and
exactly. So, I mean, Mike, we've got a ton of stuff going on down in D.C. I mean, let's just start there with the big banks. Is there anything surprising there? I missed Senator Warren's questioning,
unfortunately.
Did you listen? I don't know if you listened.
I did.
Because she tends to have a challenged relationship with the big banks. Let's put it that way.
That is perhaps the biggest surprise of the entire hearing, that she and Jamie Dimon agreed.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, she was making the argument that crypto is terrible. It's a scam. It's used for crimes. And Jamie Dimon said, well, hey, kind of what I've been saying for years.
Right.
So there wasn't anything else that was particularly interesting. This was the quietest, least confrontational bank executives come up to get their knuckles slapped hearing that I've seen in quite some time. There was very little talk about the new regulations that the FDIC and Fed and other bank regulators are putting in place, the Basel III endgame. Just a lot of individual separate questions about different things that were not particularly controversial.
And what discussion there was of this regulation actually seemed kind of critical of it from, I guess, from a policymaker's side, too. That was sort of surprising to me because it seemed like we were getting ourselves geared up for them to be more supportive.
Well, the bankers hate it, of course, and the Republicans don't like it because it's more regulation, and the Democrats generally do. There have always been concerns and questions about its application, whether it's necessary, whether everything is necessary, and whether smaller banks need to be given some carve-outs in this, et cetera. And all those details were kind of below the level of this hearing. This was more in the sense of, as I said, Republicans, we don't like regulation. Democrats, we need more regulation, and they didn't really get into the details. But then this is a regulatory process, not a legislative one.
All right, we are still waiting. President Biden, some comments on the pending legislation, the funding legislation, including funding for Ukraine. I see a shot of the podium, so that's usually a good sign.
It's close.
It's getting closer. Hey, Mike, we've also had a ton of news coming out of Washington in terms of former Speaker McCarthy saying that he's going to leave, I think, at the end of the year. I don't know what that's about, as opposed to Stanford.
The end of this month.
Any sense of what that means for some of this legislation, which is pretty important, like keeping the government open and things like that? How do you kind of factor that in?
Well, when you look at the numbers game, and you bring up a good point about keeping the government open, or just about anything else, Republicans were down to a 3-vote margin. Now they're going to be down to a 2-vote margin. And it's going to be almost impossible to pass anything because the Republicans are so divided that trying to get them together to pass legislation in the House is going to be very difficult in an election year, because they're all going to have their election priorities. The hardest thing, though, is going to be the funding the government stuff, because that has to be done. If Congress funds the government for 2024 and then basically goes home, it won't really affect the country. So they've already put off the debt ceiling till 2025. So at this point, it's a question of getting these either a continuing resolution or some of these bills the House keeps threatening to pass through. And that's going to be difficult. The smaller the margin they have, they're going to have to depend on Democrats, and we know how some Republicans react to the idea of depending on Democrats.
True. I mean, where are economists right now? Because I remember everyone being terrified, I guess, September, that we weren't going to see a continuing resolution. We got one. We got all this McCarthy drama, and now we're on Speaker Johnson. What kind of percentage shot are they giving it? What are people pricing in?
I think it's a little bit better than 50-50 in the sense that Johnson let the original CR go through. So they're hoping that he's not as beholden to the far right who would shut down the government as the previous speaker. But is that going to happen? We don't know. So it's too far out to tell, because there are a lot of things that are going into this. This whole Ukraine-Israel funding tied up with the border, all that was going to be part of the CR. They left it out. And so they have to get that sorted, or it goes back into it, and then you have those things holding it up. So at this point, we're still too far away to tell exactly what's going to happen. And I think the default is that people are going to be optimistic. But it certainly could get on our dance card as something to worry about for 2024.
We were talking with Quincy Crosby just a few minutes ago about WTI below $70 a barrel. The reaction amongst economists at this point, is this something they anticipated?
Well, economists don't anticipate oil prices because we don't know enough. But the analyst, I think the analysts at the economist's shop who cover commodities more or less anticipated this. The demand has been falling, and prices have been falling as supply has risen. The U.S. is pumping more oil than it ever has before. And so there was an expectation that prices would fall. I don't know the latest consensus for how far, but we're still within profitable range for at least U.S. fracking producers, the break-evens for them. So we're still going to see a lot of oil, and that is going to keep prices contained. The good thing, I suppose, is that it's enabling the U.S. to refill the strategic petroleum reserve.
That's a good point.
At a lower rate. And then, of course, it will, if it keeps falling, it takes edge off of energy inflation.
Yep, absolutely. All right, right now let's go President Biden delivering remarks urging Congress to pass his national security supplemental request, including funding for support of Ukraine. Let's go to President Biden in Washington.
To uphold the national security needs of the United States, and quite frankly of our partners as well. This cannot wait. Congress needs to pass supplemental funding for Ukraine before they break for the holiday resources. As simple as that. Frankly, I think it's stunning that we've gotten to this point in the first place. While Congress, Republicans in Congress are willing to give Putin the greatest gift he could hope for and abandon our global leadership, not just Ukraine, but beyond that. We've all seen the brutality that Putin has inflicted on Ukraine, invading another country, trying to subjugate his neighbors to his iron rule, committing atrocities against Ukrainian civilians, trying to plunge them into the cold and darkness of winter by bombing their electrical grid so they don't have any heat during the winter, or electricity for that matter, kidnapping thousands of Ukrainian children from their parents and families and keeping them in Russia. Russian forces are committing war crimes. It's as simple as that. It's stunning. Who is prepared to walk away from holding Putin accountable for this behavior? Who among us is really prepared to do that? You know, for the better part of 2 years, the brave people of Ukraine have denied Russia a victory on the battlefield. They've defeated Vladimir Putin's ambition to dominate Ukraine. And the people of the United States can and should take pride. They should take pride that we've enabled Ukraine's success thanks to the steady supply of weapons and ammunition. We provided them together with our partners and our allies. I just did a meeting with the G7, which was one of the issues we discussed. All of the European leaders. We are prepared to stay with us, stay with Ukraine. And our European friends are as well. Who in the United States is prepared to walk away from that? I tell you, I'm not prepared to walk away. And I don't think the American people are either. If Putin takes Ukraine, he won't stop there. It's important to see the long run here. He's going to keep going. He's made that pretty clear. If Putin attacks a NATO ally, if he keeps going, and then he attacks a NATO ally, where we've committed as a NATO member that we defend every inch of NATO territory, then we'll have something that we don't seek and that we don't have today. American troops fighting Russian troops. American troops fighting Russian troops if he moves into other parts of NATO. Make no mistake, today's vote's going to be long remembered, and history's going to judge harshly those who turn their back on freedom's cause. We can't let Putin win. Say it again, we can't let Putin win. It's in our overwhelming national interest and international interest of all our friends. Any disruption in our ability to supply Ukraine clearly strengthens Putin's position. We've run out of money to be able to do that in terms of authorization. Extreme Republicans are playing chicken with our national security, holding Ukraine's funding hostage to their extreme partisan border policies. Let me be clear. We need real solutions. I support real solutions at the border. I put forward a comprehensive plan the first day I came into office. I made it clear that we need Congress to make changes to fix what is a broken immigration system, because we all know it's broken. And I'm willing to do significantly more. But in terms of changes of policy and to provide resources that we need at the border, I'm ready to change policy as well. I've asked for billions of dollars for more border agents, more immigration judges, more asylum officers. Republicans have to decide if they want a political issue, or if they want a solution at the border. Do they really want a solution? It cannot be sustained as it is now. We need a real solution. And my team has been engaged in negotiations with Senate Democrats and Republicans on border security. Democrats have put forward a bipartisan compromise on the table. Leaders Schumer and Senate Democrats also have offered to let Republicans propose amendments to that border proposal. But Republicans have rejected it, said, no, we don't want you to even introduce your proposal, because then we're not going to, and even though the Democrats say you can amend it any way you want. No, we don't want to do that. This has to be a negotiation. Republicans think they get everything they want without any bipartisan compromise. That's not the answer. That's not the answer. And now they're willing to literally kneecap Ukraine on the battlefield and damage our national security in the process. Look, I know we have our divisions at home. Let's get past them. This is critical. Petty, partisan, angry politics can't get in the way of our responsibility as a leading nation in the world. And literally, the entire world is watching. The entire world is watching. What will the United States do? And think if we don't support Ukraine, what's the rest of the world going to do? What's Japan going to do, which is supporting Ukraine now? What's going to happen in terms of the G7? What's going to happen in terms of our NATO allies? What are they going to do? If we walk away now, they'll only embolden other would-be aggressors. So I'm calling on Congress to do something and do the right thing, to stand with the people of Ukraine, stand against the tyranny of Putin, stand for freedom, literally stand for freedom. Let's get this done. We're the reason Putin has not totally overrun Ukraine and moved beyond that. And you all heard me talk about it before. If in fact we walk away, how many of our European friends are going to continue to fund? And at what rates are they going to continue to fund it? This is too serious. Like I said, I am willing to make significant compromises on the border. We need to fix the broken border system. It is broken. And thus far, I've gotten no response. So I just we're going to be a vote a little bit later today. We'll know where we go from there. But I wanted to make this comment before the vote, and I'm sure I'll be talking with you after the vote. Thank you very much for listening. Appreciate it.
Mr. President, given the current impasse, would you be okay with Democrats willing to put more on border policy to get this current package through?
Yes.
What would you be okay with Democrats agreeing to?
I've already laid out in our negotiations with Langford and others what we're willing to do, significantly more, particularly by starting off equipping the border capacity that we need on the border, from judges to more border security, in addition to making some substantive changes. But they're unwilling to do it. I really thought, I felt good for a while. I thought we were making some real progress. Langford's a decent guy. It looked like he was prepared to move in a way, in a direction that we could come up with a compromise, both changing in substance, changing policy on the border, as well as security at the border. But they walked away. It's take everything we have here, their one proposal, which is extreme, or nothing. In the meantime, the nothing means we don't get any support for our friends and the innocent people of Ukraine. Anyway, I'll talk to you more.
Ukraine and also China. President Biden, on Ukraine and also China, there's polling by the Associated Press that shows that almost 70% of Americans, including 40% of Democrats, believe that you acted either illegally or unethically in regards to your family's business interests. Can you explain to the Americans, amid this impeachment inquiry, why you interacted with so many of your son and brother's foreign business associates?
I'm not going to comment on that. I did not, and it's just a bunch of lies.
You didn't interact with many of their business associates?
I did not. There's lies.
President Biden delivered remarks urging Congress to pass the National Security Supplemental Request, including funding to support Ukraine. He took a couple questions there at the end. Right now, let's get a reset here on these markets. We'll do that with Mr. Charlie Pellet.
Have the Dow Jones Industrial Average now moving lower, down 2 points, a drop there of less than 0.1%. We've got the S&P 500 index down 5 right now. That is a drop of less than 0.1%. Nasdaq lower by 9. That is a decline of 0.1%. And the Russell 2000 advancing up another 13 points today, up 0.7%. 10-year yield right now 4.10%. The 2-year 4.59%. Gold up $10 the ounce to $20.29, up 0.5%. And West Texas Intermediate crude, big story there, $69.44 a barrel, trading below $70. WTI down now by just about 4%. Bitcoin up 0.4%, 44,085 on Bitcoin. So again, recapping, stocks are trading mixed, a choppy session. S&P now lower by 3, down by about 0.1%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie Pellet, thank you so much. We appreciate that. Simone Foxman, Paul Sweeney, we're live here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio and streaming live on YouTube as well, where we just heard President Biden delivering some remarks urging Congress to pass his national security supplemental request. That's including funding to support Ukraine. Let's get a little bit more into kind of what we heard here and what might happen going forward. Mark Champion joins us, Bloomberg International Affairs columnist. Mark, tell us your takeaways there from that brief press conference, including a little bit of Q&A there from President Biden.
The first thing to say is that he's right in his, basic assertion that this is a really important moment. The Ukrainians already have seen, pledges of aid, military aid and financial aid fall off dramatically this year. And this stuff, has still been coming through the pipeline, but at a much lower rate. If the U.S. cannot continue to fund, that cuts off what has been close to half of all of their military and financial aid. And then it is absolutely true that, the other countries will then have to think to themselves, well, can we step up to fill the gap? Probably not. And if we can't, what do we do now? So he's absolutely right on that. But there is something of an air of desperation in his making this pitch just before the vote. He clearly knows that it's going to be difficult to persuade the Republicans. This has become a domestic political, issue for them.
where they are trying to just leverage the desire of the Biden administration to get this money through in order to get some pretty, as he called them, extreme policies through on the border.
Mark, you have a terrific opinion piece out. Fund Ukraine. The alternative is loss, not peace. And one of the things you point out is that it's far less inspiring to support Ukraine's dogged defense rather than it is, push for a win. But that's kind of the situation here. Do you think that Republicans are the most extreme Republican voices on this are dissatisfied with the idea of funding a defense of Ukraine, or are they this is just a political gambit for them?
I do think it's primarily a political gambit, what's happening now in Congress. But there is a broader debate, and it goes way beyond Republicans in Congress, where you have a lot of people saying, well, the Ukrainian summer counteroffensive didn't work. They were not able to break through and take back a whole bunch of territory. It's quite hard to see how they're going to, because what this taught us was that you really need air supremacy to do this, and they don't have it. They're not going to have it. So the argument then goes, well, if they're not going to be able to get the territory back, why not just settle now and end the war? And the answer to that is because there's no appetite on the other side, on the Russian side, to settle on the current battle lines. Russians still think they can achieve more. They're mobilizing troops. Last week, President Putin ordered mobilization of another 170,000 troops in order to get more. And from the Ukrainian point of view, they do have a strategy to succeed, not to get all their territory back at this point, but to succeed in making sure that they at least, don't lose more than they have now. And that is to, carry on with their defense until it becomes clear to Vladimir Putin that he can't succeed, that he can't go further. And that is what, they are asking their allies to do, and it's what the U.S. and what Biden is trying to support.
So, Mark, we've heard from some commentators that at some point the Ukrainians will have to accept land for peace, some type of, giving up some land in exchange for peace. Do you think that belief is anywhere within Ukraine at this point?
There's a sort of a big misconception here that if the Ukrainians say we need all our land back, that means that they don't believe that they're not willing to make any kind of negotiation or trade of land for peace. That isn't the case. It's just that if you're going to have to get into a negotiation, you don't give it up beforehand by saying, we're willing to give up X and Y. I think one shouldn't pay too much attention to what is said in public. There's a pretty sober mood in Kiev at this point. They are aware that they're unlikely to get everything that they want to get, back to the borders they originally had in 1991 or in 2013 before the annexation of Crimea in 2014. The question is where. And at the moment, on the other side, there's no willingness to say, okay, we've got enough.
Is there a bare minimum, you think? Can you draw the outline a little bit? And just in the last 40 seconds, sorry.
It's what is on the ground now is the bare minimum. The worst case scenario for the Ukrainians in terms of what they can accept, and even that will be crippling for their economy because it leaves Russia in control of a lot of their kind of sea routes and agricultural land where Ukraine is very rich.
Mark, thanks so much for joining us. Really appreciate it. Mark Champion, he's in Bloomberg Opinion based in London. We appreciate international affairs columnist for us. Looking at these markets here, kind of not much happening on the index level, off about 0.1% for the S&P. The Dow's unchanged, and the Nasdaq's again off about 0.1%. So not much movement there. The real movement is in WTI crude oil, off almost 4%, $69.61. Simone, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you. day full of
Wow.
sparks flying in
Exactly.
Washington, D.C., but we've been holding things down here in New York.
All right, Sound On with Joe Matthew from Washington, D.C. That starts right now.
Now, from our nation's capital, this is Bloomberg Sound On.
Two major stories that we're following here developing before our eyes.
What does it say about Trump's influence on the Republican Party?
What can the Biden administration do on its own to support Israel?
Bloomberg Sound On. Politics, policy, and perspective from D.C.'s top names.
The Republican caucus is at war with itself.
Members of Congress would have a press conference every day if somebody would cover that.
There is bipartisan support for Israel.
This is one of the big ones we only see once every decade or 2 decades in the Middle East.
Bloomberg Sound On with Joe Matthew on Bloomberg Radio.
Kevin McCarthy lost the gavel. Now he's leaving Congress. Welcome to the fastest show in politics as the former speaker announces plans to call it quits at the end of this year. As the new speaker, Mike Johnson, faces, of course, enormous challenges, and President Biden adding new pressure today with his call to vote on Israel and Ukraine funding. We'll put all of this together, the latest from both ends of Pennsylvania Avenue on another breaking news day in Washington. And we'll discuss with Mick Mulvaney, the co-founder of the House Freedom Caucus, former acting chief of staff in the Trump White House. Israel driving into the south of Gaza now. We're going to look at the job ahead and how effective Israel can be from the air with an expert on this. Retired Air Force General David Deptula will be with us in just moments. We'll also have analysis from our panel, of course, as you would expect this hour. Today we're joined by Republican strategist Lisa Camuso-Miller and Democratic strategist Brad Howard. So let's get started on what we know. It has been one of those days. As soon as you wake up in Washington, D.C., the headlines start flying. You heard me mention Kevin McCarthy. Joe Biden just spoke from the White House, and that's where we want to start with what could be an important test vote today on Capitol Hill when it comes to funding for Ukraine and the rest of the supplemental that the president put forth. Israel, Taiwan, border. Here's the president moments ago.
This cannot wait. Congress needs to pass supplemental funding for Ukraine before they break for the holiday resources. As simple as that. Frankly, I think it's stunning that we've gotten to this point in the first place. While Republicans in Congress are willing to give Putin the greatest gift he could hope for and abandon our global leadership, not just in Ukraine, but beyond that.
Now, as I mentioned, the Senate expected to hold a test vote later today on the overall aid package. It is expected to fail. The president, of course, knows that. But planting a flag again on this issue today, one that has been rather newsy. As I mentioned, we heard earlier from Kevin McCarthy that he's leaving the building. There were a lot of questions about whether he was going to run for re-election, what his plans might be post-speaker. I don't know. Some folks may have even thought he might run again. But he wrote an op-ed earlier today, followed by a slick produced video on Twitter, and we'll give you a taste. Kevin McCarthy waving goodbye.
Now, it is time to pursue my passion in a new arena. While I'll be departing the House at the end of this year, I will never, ever give up fighting for this country that I love so much. To all those who have supported me through the years, especially our constituents, thank you from the bottom of my heart.
And that's it. Almost like a movie trailer. It's well produced. You see him on the floor. He's doing this and that. Then he's sitting alone in a chair, wearing the suit. He's got a lav mic on his lapel. And after what you just heard, he takes the mic off and drops it.
Now, it is time to pursue my passion in a new arena. While I'll be departing the House at the end of this year,
Thank you. Here it is.
God bless you, and God bless America.
Yep.
That's a wrap.
And literally drops the mic. That's a wrap. It's not quite as dramatic when it's a lav. If I dropped this thing, that would make some noise. I'm not going to know. They're telling me in the studio, Joe, don't do it. They're expensive. Let's bring in Mick Mulvaney. I can only imagine what's going through his mind, although he might have been on the phone with Kevin McCarthy just last night. insider on the Republican side, certainly from the House to the White House. Mick, it's great to see you. Everyone's asking what it means to have Kevin McCarthy leave the House. And of course, well, it's not Speaker anymore, but it does speak pretty loudly the day after Patrick McHenry announced his plans to not run for re-election. What do you make of this?
Yeah. Hey, Joe, where do you start? It is that kind of day where Matt in your office calls me on my cell phone and said, have you seen Twitter? And you're sort of, what could possibly merit that kind of call? So I had a couple of those phone calls in the White House, as you can imagine. But anyway, a couple things. Not surprising. I didn't talk to Kevin last night, but this doesn't surprise those of us who know him. The question was sort of whether or not he was going to do this now or wait until the end of the term, keeping in mind that my understanding of California law is that Gavin Newsom will now have the right to set the re-election date. And why would a Democrat governor rush to fill a space that looks like it's a Republican seat? So this looks like it's going to eat again into the very narrow Republican majority. That's one angle here. The other angle here is with Kevin's departure, one of the reasons people were hoping he might stay around was that Kevin is the second most successful fundraiser in the history of the House after only Nancy Pelosi. And Mike Johnson, it seems to be, doing a fairly decent job in a couple of different areas, but he's no Kevin McCarthy when it comes to raising dough. And we're going into a big presidential election year. So where are they going to plug the hole on the money? My guess is that Kevin's, new job is not going to involve him raising money for the Republican Party. So there's a bunch of different angles here. We could do this for an hour, but we'll talk about whatever you want to talk about, including his video.
Well, he's got a lot of money, though, Mick, right? He could still actually play an interesting role in this campaign cycle. How will he use the millions he raised?
Oh, I would think that Nancy Mace is going to have a problem. Matt Gaetz is going to have a problem. Anybody, the guy from Tennessee, Burchett, is going to have a problem. That's where this money is going. Might a little of it go to help build the Republican majority? Yeah. Might some of it go towards settling some scores? Absolutely. And who could blame him? Who could really blame him? He was, like Kevin, don't like Kevin. He happens to be a friend of mine. I like him, but he was treated bad as a human being. And, these folks, even though they're Congress people, we put them up on a pedal stuff, they're still humans. And that's got us smart. And revenge is going to be particularly sweet, I think, for Kevin if he's able to take any of those folks out.
Did you say you spoke with him yesterday?
No, I didn't speak with him.
Either way, Mick, last time you guys talked, where was his head? Is this a Washington that's broken or a Washington that doesn't need me? What was he thinking?
No, it was still angered how he'd been treated. It's a personal thing now between him and Matt Gaetz, and you got a little bit of that when you saw him speak to the press and so forth. We saw it a little bit less filtered, but still the same end result, which is that this had nothing to do with the fact that he cut a deal with the Senate. This has nothing to do with the fact that he had a bipartisan deal to keep the government open. This was Matt Gaetz looking for a way to settle a score. I don't understand how it started, and if Kevin knows, he wasn't sharing it with those of us who are close to him. So this was just a personal animosity, and that's not going away anytime soon.
Well, it's been a tortured experience for him, I know, over the past couple of months. You go back to October, and I just want to kind of go through the shades of McCarthy here. You heard that very upbeat message he sent today. That's a wrap. We did the right thing. Sounds a lot like some of the things that he actually said over the course of time following the fateful CR that got him fired. Let's work through this. This is the beginning of October, the 3rd here.
I don't regret standing up for choosing governance over grievance. It is my responsibility. It is my job. I do not regret negotiating. Our government is designed to find compromise. I don't regret my efforts to build coalitions and find solutions.
And that, by the way, was the good day. That was the victory lap after they got the CR passed. It started to get a little dark. This is the 13th of
What
October.
I did was 100% right, keeping government open. Can you imagine for one moment the wars that are going around the world and if government was shut down? That if our troops were not being paid right now, we want them in the aircraft carrier strike team to be out there questioning whether they're going to be able to pay their rent?
Yeah, fast forward to the 20th of October. Started to get a little short in the quarters in the Capitol.
Is that the right strategy for him here?
We are in a very bad place right now, yes.
When they're going to
a very bad place right now, Mick. Is the Republican conference still in a bad place? Because Joe Biden just called for Ukraine funding to be passed, and there doesn't seem to be a path for anything right now, including funding the government.
Well, those are two different questions. Let's talk about the Biden thing.
Yep, fair enough.
Biden's politics, right? I mean, Biden is just politics. The House has already passed a bill to fund Israel. The White House doesn't like it, but the way it's supposed to work is the Senate's supposed to pass something, and then the House and the Senate's supposed to conference. Yep. This is the old schoolhouse rock. You know, I'm just a bill, I'm only a bill, et cetera, et cetera. So that's just politics. The White House doesn't like what the House has done, but the House has certainly done something. Your first question is a lot more interesting, which is the Republican conference broken? Oh, yeah, there's no question about it. I've not talked to Patrick since Patrick's a good friend of mine since his announcement yesterday. Patrick, technically, Joe, as you know, was term limited as the chairman of House Financial Services, but was in line for an exemption and probably could have stayed if the Republicans were going to keep the majority. His departure might tell you a couple of different things. Number one, that he thinks that maybe they're going to go in a minority anyway, and it wouldn't be a chairmanship that's open to him. But secondly, and this is, I've talked with a bunch of folks, including some folks, I'm here in Tuscaloosa, Alabama for the debate tonight on News Nation. There's a bunch of Republican folks here, and they're all talking about how poisonous the atmosphere is right now in Washington, D.C., that if there's a Republican who can find the door and find a good exit strategy, they're looking for it right now. You mentioned Mike Johnson at the outset. You didn't mention Bill Johnson, a lesser-known member of Congress, came in with me in 2010. He's already accepted the job as the president of Youngstown State in his home state of Ohio. It's unclear as to when he would be leaving. If he leaves in January, that's yet another Republican seat that is gone in that majority. So no, if you're a Republican who has a better offer right now on the table, you are seriously considering it, looking for a way to leave.
Wow. You must be glad you did that already, Mick. Pretty remarkable situation. By the way, thanks for taking Matt's call and looking at Twitter this morning. I look forward to your thoughts on the debate tonight. Good luck down there in Tuscaloosa, where you've got four Republican candidates on the stage. And we turn our attention to the other major story we're following. And, of course, that's what's happening overseas in Israel, and more specifically in Gaza, of course, where hostages are still being held by Hamas. John Kirby, retired admiral, speaking for the White House National Security Apparatus earlier today on Good Morning America on ABC News.
We think there's about 8 hostages that are Americans. We know of at least one woman in that group. We're doing everything we can to try to get them released. We're constantly engaged with our partners in the region to try to get this humanitarian pause back in place.
Now, to give you a sense of where we are, Israel is putting numbers on this because we keep asking. IDF says it has killed half of Hamas's mid-level commanders. This at the cost of 16,200 civilian lives since the war began in Gaza. The Wall Street Journal putting some other numbers on this today as well. Remembering, the IDF is vowing to destroy Hamas, to end Hamas as we know it. And after many weeks of bombing and over 16,000 civilian lives, the Wall Street Journal reports that Hamas is still largely intact. At least 5,000 militants overall have been killed, leaving the majority of the group's 30,000 members on the field. Now, remembering that the Biden administration is urging restraint, calling for more precision. You're hearing it from lawmakers now, many of them Democrats on Capitol Hill. You wonder what's going to happen here in southern Gaza, and that's why we wanted to talk to David Deptula, the retired Lieutenant General, Air Force General, now Dean of the Mitchell Institute for Aerospace Studies, former Air Force Deputy Chief for Intelligence, Surveillance, and Reconnaissance. It's good to see you, General. Thanks for coming to talk to us. The calls for more precision have been, in many cases, been followed by scenes of absolute destruction, dropping bombs on apartment buildings and so forth. And with your experience as an airman, I wonder if you can speak to what ability Israel has to be more precise.
Well, Joe, first, a couple of things. I think in build up to a very good answer to your question is it's important to recognize that the military operations being conducted by the Israeli Defense Forces are being integrated across all warfighting domains. That's air, sea, land, space, and cyber. So it's a multi-domain effort. Now, with respect to air operations can be and generally are extraordinarily precise. The issue is knowing what the targets are to be affected. And here's where, while ground operations have become more prominent, air operations need that information. So one of the primary roles of the ground operations of the Israeli Defense Forces into Gaza is to gather intelligence about Hamas's tunnels, rockets, command and control, and so on and so forth, that can then be destroyed from the air. So both air and ground operations are completely integrated. All of that said, back to your lead-in, this is an urban environment. So, of course, buildings are going to be destroyed. That's part of the reason why the Israelis have gone to great lengths to advise occupants, civilian occupants, to move prior to their airstrikes, and then providing warnings, additional warnings, prior to releasing the weapons. So it is a very challenging situation. But I think it's also extraordinarily important when one's discussing the subject of civilian casualties to understand the laws of armed conflict. And frankly, it is startling to see the lack of understanding of those laws. And on the other hand, perhaps it's not so startling as Hamas is engaged in what's called lawfare, or the misuse of international law as a substitute for traditional military means. So let me pause there, and because I could go on for quite a while here, but
well, I'm
does
sure
that
you
help?
could. It does help a lot because, look, you've got a lot of people who have never served their country, who have never flown a fighter jet like you have, and have never carried a rifle, who are acting like experts here in Washington. When you hear lawmakers say, hey, you need to cool it with the air attacks, stop with the 155 millimeter shells, send troops in to be more precise, what do you say to them?
Yeah, well, once again, I go back to the fact that malign disinformation and manipulating perceptions is a fundamental element of Hamas's strategy. They're using the fact that disinformation is 70% more likely to be shared on social media than news that's true. I think we saw this, to remind your audience, a good case in point's the damage to the Gaza hospital that was caused by a Palestinian militant rocket that exploded over it. But it was they all blame that cast it as an Israeli attack when it wasn't. The other one, and to be candid, I mean, right up front, you cited 16,000 plus civilian casualties. Those numbers were released by Hamas-controlled organizations.
The Gaza Health Ministry, yes. Do you not trust those numbers, General?
What?
You do not trust those numbers from the Gaza Health Ministry?
Oh, absolutely not. Absolutely not. Note that those numbers do not separate deaths of Hamas or other terrorists in those figures. So the impression given is that they're all innocents, which, and look, I don't think anybody knows, because there is no independent source on the ground accounting for those numbers. But you know, they're treating Hamas deaths as if they were part of that. And now let me continue, because this is extraordinarily important, but it gets complex. People don't seem to understand that Hamas's use of civilians as human shields and their misuse of protected sites like mosques and hospitals are war crimes, and that the international laws of armed conflict put the responsibility for the threat to civilian lives on those who are putting those civilians in harm's way. In this case, that's Hamas. Hamas intentionally aims to kill civilians, to include Palestinians.
We understand that, and that's honestly, General, that's something that we have aired out extensively on this program. But when you hear, I know you don't buy the numbers from the health ministry, but that 16,000 number includes 5,000 children, presumably not Hamas militants. Maybe you've got some folks in their teens, I don't know. But there's obviously what some folks see as a disproportionate response here, and I'm trying to get to the proportionate response in your eyes.
Right. Well, once again, you nor, and I get it, and I understand that. And by the way, I'm not taking you or your network on. And when I'm speaking about media, I'm talking about media in general. There are some who are better than others, of which you are better than some of the others. But
well, there's that, I guess.
the fact is, war is a terrible thing, okay? And anyone who thinks there's such a thing as, immaculate warfare simply has never studied it. So yes, there will be, unfortunately, collateral damage, unintentional civilian casualties. But again, what you have to do is look at who's doing what. Hamas is intentionally using civilians as cover. That is a war against humanity. At the same time, let me speak to the other point. It's important to note that even if Hamas uses human shields, Israel's still bound by this principle of proportionality, and they do have to take all feasible precautions to minimize harm to civilian casualties or to civilians. And they have a history of doing that. But that does not mean that they cannot strike targets because of the presence of those human shields. Attack
they're
is
clearly
allowed,
going forward with that, and I realize that you may not be able to separate them, General. I really appreciate the difficulty here as civilians move. Hamas follows them and embeds itself with them. And I realize that there are no easy answers on this, but that's why we wanted to bring you in. And I have to ask you about Ukraine while you're here, sir. The president's talking about it today, and we are told that Ukraine is out of time, not only out of money, but out of time as we head into the winter here without more support from the United States. How dire is this situation as we head for the cold?
Well, this is another one that's extraordinarily important, not just for the Ukrainians protecting the sovereignty of their nation after having been illegally invaded by the Russians, but it's also extraordinarily important and is in the best interest of the citizenry of the United States of America. Now, I just fortuitously met with the Ukrainian defense minister yesterday in a small setting and had a discussion on this subject. I won't go into any details except to say that it is extraordinarily important that the United States support the Ukrainians in their defense, not only of their own people, but in the peace-loving and freedom-embracing nations of NATO, which includes the United States. They're spilling in the blood of their sons and daughters to defend their country, but they're also defending the principles and the interests of the United States so that we don't have to get involved by sending our sons and daughters to fight against Putin. So aid is extraordinarily important. Essentially, if you were given the opportunity or the proposition that you could bring Russia to a halt of its aggression, not just against Ukraine, but anywhere in NATO, for about 4% of the military budget, would you do it? That's a hell of a good deal without any U.S. men and women being involved on the ground.
It's
in
pretty
direct
remarkable.
confrontation.
And you have to think, you go back 20 years, every Republican on Capitol Hill would have voted for that, General. It's good to have you. From the cockpit of an F-15 to our table here on Bloomberg Sound On, General David Deptula, many thanks for the insight, sir. It's good to have you back with us here on Bloomberg. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington, the fastest show in politics. My gosh, we haven't taken a break yet here. We're going to assemble the panel because I'm sure they're going to have strong feelings about everything we just heard from Mick Mulvaney to General Deptula. First, let's update trading on Wall Street. For that, we go to New York and hear from Charlie Pellet. Hi, Charlie.
Thank you very much, Joe Matthew. Choppy session right now. We've got the S&P in the red. Little change. Perhaps the key takeaway, perhaps the theme right through the jobs report. Right now, the S&P is down 2 points. Drop there of less than 0.1%. Dow Jones Industrial Average is holding on to a gain of 33 points, up by 0.1%. NASDAQ down 19, a decline of 0.1%. Cannot ignore moves in the oil market today, below $70 a barrel on WTI. West Texas Intermediate crude right now is lower by just about 3%. We've got the 10-year yielding 4.11%, the 2-year 4.60%, and gold up $9 the ounce to 2028, up by 0.5%. Sources tell Bloomberg Apple, which is seeking to reverse a decline in Mac and iPad sales, is preparing several new models and upgrades for early next year. Apple shares today down 0.3%. Recapping, stocks lower, S&P down 2.5 points, down 0.1%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thanks and welcome to the Wednesday edition of Bloomberg Sound On. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington with a heck of a lot to talk about here from the Capitol, where we have news, the White House, and of course overseas, Israel and Ukraine, all popping today with headlines on the terminal. And we want to assemble our panel to get into everything that we've heard over the last 25 minutes. Lisa Camuso-Miller is with us, Republican strategist, of course, former spokesperson for the RNC, and host of the Friday Reporter podcast. We're big fans of it around here. Brad Howard's back, too, Democratic strategist, former spokesperson for the Blue Dog Democrats. Great to see both of you, and welcome. Lisa, I'll start with you because the Republican conference in the House is something we focused on a lot with Mick Mulvaney, one that Kevin McCarthy is running from, one that Patrick McHenry is running from. Would you be running from it as well?
Hard to be successful there, Joe. It seems to me like the other thing we have to probably consider, too, is that even though 2 months ago, former Speaker McCarthy said that he was staying, that there was work to be done, it's also really difficult to not be in leadership anymore. Step away from that and be just a regular rank and file member and not have that power that he had for so long worked for and then had stripped away from him. So my suspicion is that there probably is another really great job in the wings and there'll be more for him to report. Who knows? But to me, I think more than anything, what we all know to be true is being shown out in the fact that these big retirements are happening, and they're happening almost every day.
There are Democrats, of course, leaving as well. But it does seem to be a bit of a Republican story at this point. It's an interesting situation that we're in here, Brad, and I wonder your thoughts on just what it means for the Democratic conference. They're only 4 seats away from taking control of the House. Does more of this end up in a change in power in the House of Representatives?
Well, let me say a couple things. I think first, more broadly, typically you can determine which party thinks they're going to win control of Congress in the next election, judging by how many retire versus the other side. It seems to me both sides are fed up. This is the moment because you're seeing just about the same number of retirements on the Democratic side as you are on the Republican side. And we've had Democrats, David Cicilline left midterm. Brian Higgins is leaving in February.
That's right.
As well. So, but this is a big problem with Speaker Johnson. And what I find kind of funny about Speaker McCarthy's announcement is he doesn't have a job lined up or he hasn't announced one yet. I suspect, in a way, this is his final, jab at the folks that ousted him, because now they've got to have a majority with 2 seats. And then, if Bill Johnson leaves, and that gets down to 1 seat, at any moment, a procedural motion, Democrats could win temporary control of the floor with the right number of Republican absences. So this is a big problem for Speaker Johnson, how he's going to navigate probably one of the toughest appropriations battles we've seen in a while in January and February with the new staggered CR and from there. And so, it's just a big problem with the Republican majority. And I think it's only going to get worse, and you're going to continue to see more retirements or resignations as we're seeing.
Boy, that would be remarkable. Lisa, should the president today, instead of calling on Congress to pass Ukraine funding, just sent a message to Mike Johnson saying, you need me? This majority is so thin now, Mike Johnson has to know he needs Democrats to do anything, right?
Yes, I'm sure he does. But also, too, just based on his background and how he's performed so far, he's doing everything he can to try to maintain that power for the Republican majority. But Brad's point is so good, Joe. This razor-thin margin is going to get even slimmer in February, right? We've got Santos's seat will be hopefully filled by mid-February, but then that's just a 2-seat majority for the speaker. And then with Higgins and Johnson potentially by the end of February, this is going to be, for those of us who are watching in the cheap seats, it's going to be a show to watch.
A show to watch, and it might be a scary one, Brad. Let's Let's run odds on this for a minute. With everything that we're talking about here, the lack of a deal on the border, I know some folks are more optimistic about this, including Senator Langford, who's leading the negotiations. Knowing how many legislative days are left, and knowing that we're going into a campaign cycle here, my goodness, you guys are talking about what could be a 1 or 2 seat majority. We're not getting any of this done, are we? Yeah. Funding for Ukraine, and to put it, a bill to avoid a government shutdown, none of that's going to happen.
To put this in full perspective, we are only 4 full legislative days between now and the next government shutdown deadline. 4. So you got fly in and fly out days, because we know not much gets done on those. So you're right. I mean, this is a big, big concern. Thankfully, I think everyone should enjoy what should be a relatively peaceful holiday season legislatively, because next year is going to be probably one of the most tumultuous ever. And then you add in the presidential election. But what I will say again about Kevin McCarthy's departure is there's an image floating around. I don't know if anybody remembers the term Young Guns that featured 3 young Republican leaders that were going to lead the Republican majority, which was Eric
They're
Cantor,
all gone,
Paul
Brad.
Ryan, and Kevin McCarthy. Now they're all gone, but this was like the future of the Republican Party. And I think this is a pivotal moment for the future of the Republican Party, because you're starting to see this big divide between the grassroots of the party, the grassroots voters, and the people that kind of come in and out every now and then. They're not in the everyday moment of politics. A big divide between that and the establishment that's funded by, Sheldon Adelson and the super PACs. So, like, how the Republicans negotiate that very tough dynamic is going to be a big challenge for them.
We've got a great conversation going with our panel, Brad Howard and Lisa Camuso-Miller. If you're just joining us, I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. I want to ask you both about what we heard from General Deptula, because he was strident today and clearly does not think that lawmakers or progressive critics of what's happening in Israel have any idea of what they're talking about. He doesn't trust the numbers from Gaza. And Lisa, I wonder how you see this impacting in Washington here, because the president's received a lot of criticism for supporting this war in Israel. Progressives are upset with him. We know that Arab American voters and Muslim American voters are both upset with him. But does the general have a point about this armchair quarterbacking from here in Washington?
Yes, I think he does. I mean, I think more than anything that I've said it before, and I'll continue to say it, a stable Middle East and a stable Europe is to the benefit of a stable United States. And so I think, and with my limited experience and understanding of how this all works, is that we need to follow the generals. We need to follow the leaders, the folks that know about what needs to happen there. Do I think that all kinds of stories and false information is happening? Absolutely. I think we need to listen to the generals on the ground and do what we can to support them. And the more that we sit back and play games and politics with support for our allies, to me, doesn't make very good sense, not only for the war effort, but also for our stable United States.
What's your take on this, Brad? The president needs to have a concerted message when it comes to this criticism. He's certainly sending one to Israel. What should be the message to his critics on Israel after what you just heard from the general? Do you disagree with what he said?
No, I honestly don't understand why anybody would believe anything Hamas says when they have, again, lied and used the Palestinian people as, human shields from bombings and attacks, and were, forced, like, preventing them from leaving and fleeing, war zones. But that aside, I think the president and the White House have 4 big, issues they have to deal with this war, which is going to consume probably the remainder of his first term. I think number one is you've got to win the war, and I don't think you'll ever fully be able to get rid of Hamas, but to really, decimate them. I think that's priority number one. But beyond that, you've got Israel standing in the world. That's going to be a big problem for Blinken as Secretary of State to fix, and the president, as this has really kind of divided the world about how to deal with the issue of Israel. And then back home, the president has 2 big problems domestically. Number one is, how do you combat the anti-Semitism that has exploded in the open across the U.S.? And number 2, and that is in both parties, but we're starting to see it from the very progressive left and on college campuses. I think number 2, how do you fix the political problem, the fact that young voters, particularly young progressive voters, are skeptical of the president's commitment to Israel, or questioning that commitment. And so he's got to win those. They're not going to go to Trump necessarily, but they may just get out of the process altogether or get behind a third party. So he's got a lot of problems to fix here and address. And I feel confident that he is doing the right things, both militarily and diplomatically. But how do you address this very complex political problem is going to be a tough one.
With a lot of noise out there, I've got less than a minute, Lisa. Is this a Republican problem too, or one for Joe Biden only?
Well, it certainly seems to be that that's where the buck will stop with the White House. And so the White House, I think, probably has the burden here. But, you know, there's a lot of blame to go around, Joe. There's a lot of game playing in the House in terms of funding. There's a lot of other voices that are out there that, and let's be fair. I mean, the former president started a big, he opened a chasm in unhappiness and the ability for people to criticize other groups in a way that has, I think, opened a door to the anti-Semitism that we've heard all across the globe.
Well, we're going to push this conversation to the campaign trail because we've got a Republican debate tonight and some pretty remarkable rhetoric from both Joe Biden and Donald Trump. They're saying it out loud now. We'll have that next. This is Bloomberg.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
It's 1:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We have got a decidedly mixed market with the Dow higher, the S&P, NASDAQ. They are both in the red, but the Russell 2000 keeps on going. Right now, we have got the Russell 2000 up by 0.7%. To put that in context, the S&P now lower, little change, down 1 point. Likely going to see a lot more of that right through the jobs report Friday morning. Bottom line here, stocks are struggling to gain traction following a rally driven by bets that the Fed will cut rates next year. Oil sinking below $70 a barrel. West Texas Intermediate crude down now by 3.6%, $69.68 a barrel, taking oil stocks with it. Case in point, ExxonMobil down now by 1.4%, BP down 0.7%, Chevron though up by about 0.7%. 10-year yield 4.11%, and the 2-year yield 4.59%. Industry data suggests hiring slowed in November. Also today, new data on mortgages, as we hear from Bloomberg's Vinny Del Giudice.
Mortgage rates fell to the lowest in almost 4 months last week. We're talking 7.17%, spurring demand for loan refinancing. Since peaking near 8% in October, mortgage rates have retreated amid speculation the Federal Reserve has done tightening to fight inflation. Mortgage News Daily, which updates more frequently, put the 30-year loan rate at 7.08% as of yesterday. Vinny Del Giudice, Bloomberg Radio.
Spot gold up 0.5% at $2,029 the ounce, while Bitcoin is up 0.1%, 43,607 right now on Bitcoin. Did see Bitcoin trading above 44,000. Again, recapping, mixed day for stocks, little change with the S&P down now by 0.1%. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
This is Bloomberg Sound On with Joe Matthew on Bloomberg Radio.
The two apparent nominees, if I can say that, maybe the nominee and the front runner, whatever we're calling Joe Biden and Donald Trump these days, they're both saying things out loud that until very recently, people were just kind of thinking. I'm going to start with Donald Trump. Now, remember, there's a Republican debate tonight. Tuscaloosa, we're going to be watching with 4 on stage. Donald Trump will not be one of them. He likes to counter-program these things, and he held his big event last night, another town hall on Fox with Sean Hannity, in which this whole idea of dictatorship came up. Will you be an authoritarian president? Been a lot of reports lately saying that he's going to go after his enemies, that it'll be a second term of retribution, weeding out bureaucrats who don't like him. And I guess that is going to happen. Let's bring you to the town hall last night. Here's Sean Hannity.
I want to go back to this one issue, though, because the media has been focused on this and attacking you. Under no circumstances, you are promising America tonight you would never abuse power as retribution against anybody.
Except for day one.
Except
Look,
what?
he's going crazy. Except for day one.
Meaning?
I want to close the border and I want to drill.
That's
drill,
not. That's not.
No.
That's not retribution.
I'm going to be. You know, he keeps. We love this guy. He says, "You're not going to be a dictator, are you?" I said, "No. Other than day one, we're closing the border and we're drilling. After that, I'm not a dictator."
So that's
okay. Kind of like he says, you know, he comes to serve another 4 years, unless it's 5, 6, 7, 8, or 9. So we're saying that out loud, and guess what? Joe Biden's talking out loud too. Many people have asked, well, why is he even running here? He's too old, of course. Is he the only Democrat who can beat Donald Trump? He was at a fundraiser last evening in Boston. We're going to walk you in. You can see this if you're with us on YouTube as well. The line here, that maybe he wouldn't even be running at all if it weren't for Donald Trump. Here's Joe Biden.
Would you be running for president if Trump wasn't running?
I expect so, but look, he is running, and I have to run.
Would you drop out if Trump runs out?
No, not now.
All right, I thought we had the fundraiser. That was the cleanup, by the way. Cleaning up again in aisle 5. He said in that fundraiser, if Trump was not running, I'm not sure I'd be running. but we cannot let him win for the sake of the country. By the time he got back to the White House from Boston, as you just saw, he was cleaning things up and says he's not the only Democrat who could beat Trump. All right, let's reassemble the panel, because I can't figure anything out here. Lisa Camuso-Miller, our Republican strategist, joined today by Brad Howard, Democratic strategist. Lisa, this is why nobody wants either of these guys, right?
That's exactly right, Joe. But, you know, look, I remember many, many years ago when my grandmother was about their same age, she used to say anything she wanted out loud, too. I mean, this is where we are. We're living with two guys that are running. The complaint is that they're too old. But they also, regardless of their age, these two candidates, these two men, have been gaffe machines from the start, from the very beginning of time on their political and life. Gaffe machines.
Oh, got it. I'm glad I clarified that, because you could have maybe gotten away with either of those, I think. Yeah, Brad, I don't know. Is there something refreshing about this? Is this a new, honest age in politics where you actually say what you think?
Well, look, as a Democratic strategy who's run a number of campaigns and media trained a lot of candidates, they should never say what they're actually thinking. It's never going to end well.
Okay, then.
But what I would say is that, like, there are a few opportunities in politics where you get the opportunity to answer with a definitive, clarion call of an answer, like a simple yes or no. Like, are you going to be a dictator? The first word should have been no. Like, you know, and then, like, you had the similar problem on the left with, like, the Progressive Caucus chair, Pramila Jayapal. It was like, are you anti-Semitic? And she's like, well, I'm like, just say no. Like, there's just opportunities you get to do that. And I don't know why folks struggle with someone who just provided. And I think this is typically to Donald Trump's strength, is like, he usually just gives a short, quick answer and moves on. But to, you know, to my Republican friend's point, he's just kind of like just droning on these days. And so I do think Joe Biden, though, what he said may not have been something you want your nominee saying, but it is accurate, right? I do think that if Donald Trump were not running, I don't think Joe Biden would be running. I think he views, he got into the race because of Donald Trump. He has made it a clarion call of our morality and soul as a nation. And I think he's beat him again. He's convinced he's the only one who can beat him. So, you know, I don't think that part of it's bad, but you want your nominee to be, I'm going to be president, here's what I'm going to do, and I want this job. Not like, well, I'm only in because he's in. So that part was a little not great, but I think it is accurate, though. I do think that sentiment is true.
All right, so everyone's cards are on the table here, Lisa. There's a remarkable story in the New York Times this morning. Kash Patel, former Trump counterterror advisor, he was on Steve Bannon's podcast or show or whatever it is. A new Trump admin will come after the media, he says. The quote, a bench of all-American lawyers will go out and find the conspirators, not just in government, but in media, unquote. He goes on to say the administration will use the Constitution to prosecute them for crimes they said we have always been guilty of, but never have. Speaking of saying it out loud, Lisa, what would that mean for a second Trump term? Am I in trouble?
We all are, Joe. I mean, and that is spoken from a former Republican spokesperson. I mean, this is not the way. This is not the way for democracy. I mean, a re-election of Donald Trump is the end of democracy as we know it. I mean, we need the free press. We need the conversations to happen. We do need authenticity in elected officials, but this is a step beyond, right? This is beyond what we need. This is beyond what we want to hear. But let them say it out loud. Let them say it out loud every single day so that everybody knows what it is they're voting for when they vote for Donald Trump. That is not okay. We need to hold elected officials accountable, Republicans, Democrats, and everybody else. And by doing that, we have a free and fair press that talks about and calls out the rights and the wrongs of what they're doing. And to go after the media, to me, is another example of how another Trump administration is a step in the wrong direction for America, and it cannot happen.
Brad, I've got just 30 seconds here. If Donald Trump gets reelected, should reporters in Washington lawyer up?
Yes, 100%. And I think I'm thankful that Joe Biden has had an incredible record of appointing a lot of diverse people, diverse backgrounds, and competent judges to the federal bench. I'll say this as we close. It's important we got to look at these conspiracy theories and what's causing them. Democrats need to talk about a hopeful, bright future if they're going to win this election.
Well, we're going to have some final thoughts coming up with this great panel, Lisa and Brad, straight ahead. I'm Joe Matthew. This is Bloomberg.
company news headlines on Bloomberg Radio.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. Citigroup shares up 3.8% after Chief Financial Officer Mark Mason said the Wall Street giant remains on track to deliver full-year revenue that is in line with the firm's earlier guidance, despite a slump in trading revenue. And with more on the story, here's Bloomberg's Denise Pellegrini.
Charlie, Exxon was boosted by its $60 billion acquisition of Pioneer Natural Resources, and it now says it will repurchase $20 billion of stock next year. That matches our rival Chevron, by the way. It pledged to lift buybacks after agreeing to buy Hess for $53 billion in late October. Exxon also plans to spend $23 to $25 billion on capital projects next year as it expands its footprint in North America's most prolific oil field and also pursues untapped reserves in overseas regions, including Guyana. That compares with a 2023 target of about $25 billion. And CEO Darren Woods has been investing heavily in both fossil fuels and low-carbon projects that he says he believes will keep Exxon at the forefront to the energy transition. Charlie.
And that's Denise Pellegrini reporting on ExxonMobil. Its shares down now by 1.1%. We do have oil dropping today by 3.7%. Chevron, though, up by 0.7%. McDonald's is looking to hit 50,000 locations around the world by 2027 in what the company calls the fastest expansion spurt in its history. The chain currently has more than 41,000 restaurants. And those are our top company stories at this hour. And this is Bloomberg.
You're listening to Bloomberg Sound On with Joe Matthew on Bloomberg Radio.
We are live from Washington, where guess who will be here in 5 minutes? I almost forgot what Kaylee Lyons looked like. Let's get you up to date first on world and national news. Nancy Lyons has that from the Bloomberg 99.1 newsroom in Washington. Hi, Nancy.
Thanks, Joe. President Biden is urging Congress to act quickly on aid to Ukraine, saying it cannot wait. He gave an address this afternoon from the White House, saying a failure to provide aid would be a gift to Russian President Vladimir Putin.
I'm calling on Congress to do something and do the right thing, to stand with the people of Ukraine, stand against the tyranny of Putin, stand for freedom, literally stand for freedom. Let's get this done.
Biden says petty partisan politics cannot get in the way of our responsibility as a leading nation in the world. Conservative Republicans have stalled fresh support to Ukraine for 3 months, demanding concessions on immigration policy before approving any deal. The Senate is expected to hold a test vote later today on the overall aid package, but that is expected to fail. Well, after serving the same California district for 17 years, former House Speaker Kevin McCarthy says he's leaving the House. He made the announcement in a video posted on social media.
It is time to pursue my passion in a new arena. While I'll be departing the House at the end of this year, I will never, ever give up fighting for this country that I love so much.
McCarthy's exit comes after he was ousted from his leadership position in a historic vote back in October. In an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal, McCarthy said he would continue to recruit others to run for office, but he did not say what his next steps would be. His departure at the end of the year means Republicans will see their majority shrink even further. They're already dealing with the loss of former Congressman George Santos, who was expelled over ethics concerns. Norman Lear has died at the age of 101. The TV producer broke new ground with shows like All in the Family and this one, Good Times. Lear's shows took up issues that had previously been untouchable on TV, like racism, feminism, homosexuality, and the war in Vietnam. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Nancy Lyons. Now back to you, Joe.
All right, Nancy, thank you. It's a new point of distinction for our Vice President, Kamala Harris. You've heard this a couple of dozen times already.
Senate being equally divided, the Vice President votes in the affirmative, and the bill, as amended, is passed.
Yeah. The tie-breaking votes. So many of them, she set a record. Kamala Harris issuing her 32nd tiebreaker to advance the confirmation of a new federal judge yesterday. That was enough to set the record, topping John C. Calhoun's 200-year record. And The funny part is, before the day was over, she cast her 33rd. And it's likely that it'll take a long time to break the Kamala record by the time she's done. Calhoun cast 31 tiebreakers as VP from 1825 to 1832. Chuck Schumer, so impressed by this, he gave her a golden gavel to commemorate the occasion. Final thoughts from our panel, Lisa Camuso-Miller. And Brad Howard is with us. Lisa, you worked for the Speaker of the House. You have a sense of how this stuff works. What does it tell us about this Congress when Kamala Harris is setting all-time records?
I think it's illustrative of the times that we're living in, where the country is so divided, but really in a very narrow way, where we all sort of live in this space where, like, Republicans and Democrats all are fighting for just the slightest margin for majority. To me, that's right. Indicative of the world we're living in.
So, Brad, is Kamala Harris actually the most powerful person in Washington, but doesn't get credit for it?
I have a lot of respect for the vice president. I think she's been a great vice president for Joe Biden. I think as he struggles with young voters and voters of color, she's going to be even more important and has been great on the issue of choice. I'll point out historically, John C. Calhoun was an adamant defender of slavery and white Southerners. And I love that Kamala Harris is the one who ousted his record.
How great is that? I love that. Brad, thank you. This is a great panel, great pairing. Let's do it again soon. Lisa Camuso-Miller, Brad Howard. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. Hour 2 of Sound On starts right now.
Now, from our nation's capital, this is Bloomberg Sound On.
Two major stories that we're following here developing before our eyes.
What does it say about Trump's influence on the Republican Party?
What can the Biden administration do on its own to support Israel?
Bloomberg Sound On. Politics, policy, and perspective from D.C.'s top names.
The Republican caucus is at war with itself.
Members of Congress would have a press conference every day if somebody would cover them.
There is bipartisan support for Israel.
This is one of the big ones we only see once every decade or 2 decades in the Middle East.
Bloomberg Sound On with Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lyons on Bloomberg Radio.
President Biden dares Congress to take an important vote today on Ukraine, but it's going to fail anyway. Welcome to Hour 2 of Sound On with breaking news from both ends of Pennsylvania Avenue today as the president beats the drum on funding our allies in hot wars. And Speaker Mike Johnson faces major challenges in passing legislation of any sort. As we learned today, the former Speaker, Kevin McCarthy, is leaving the building, retiring by the end of the year. We'll be joined on all of this by Terry Haynes, the founder of Pangea Policy, longtime veteran of the House. The big bank CEOs testifying today in the Senate with a warning. We're going to walk through it with Nathan Dean from Bloomberg Intelligence. Kaylee was also there for the action. While yesterday's testimony from the college president still echoing inside the Capitol. We're going to talk about that later on this hour with First Amendment expert John Pushinsky from the University of Pittsburgh. So, again, lots to cover today. And we start, as always, with a look at Wall Street, trading now with Charlie Pellet in New York. Hey, Charlie.
Thank you very much, Joe Matthew. Choppy session with the S&P 500 index. We'll call that unchanged on the day right now. We have got the Dow higher by 43 points, while NASDAQ is lower by 6 points. Little change there, but perhaps a key takeaway, the Russell 2000 index of small cap shares, that continues to move higher. The Russell 2000 up by 0.7%. Again, to put it in context, S&P flat on the day. Stocks are struggling to gain traction following a rally driven by bets that the Fed will cut rates next year. Oil sinking below $70 a barrel. Wall Street, though, also looking ahead to Friday morning's jobs report, which is currently forecast to show employers added some 187,000 jobs in November. Thomas Kennedy is Chief Investment Officer at J.P. Morgan Securities.
We're looking for the continued moderation in job growth, consistent with an economy that is rebalancing without much economic pain. The moderation in the labor market is a necessary requirement for the durability of this soft landing.
And you can hear more of that conversation on the Surveillance podcast. You can download it wherever you get your podcasts. And this morning, we did get data from the ADP Research Institute showing that American companies scaled back hiring in November, adding to evidence of a cooling labor market. West Texas Intermediate crude fell below $70 a barrel for the first time since July. WTI right now is down at $69.90 a barrel, falling by 3.3%. Spot gold up $60 0.6%, 20.30 the ounce. We've got Bitcoin up by 0.1%, 43,932 was trading again today, above 44,000, with the 10-year 4.11% and the 2-year 4.58%. Again, recapping, stocks are trading mixed with the S&P 500 index now lower by 1 point. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Hey, Charlie, thank you. As always, welcome to Hour 2 of Bloomberg Sound On. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. Charlie's patented double point kicks us off for the hour. Find us on YouTube. You would have seen Brad Howard's Yule log burning for that whole last hour. Search Bloomberg Global News. We'll meet you here in the studio. You never call, you never write. I was lamenting.
Not true.
Well, it's largely true. She texted a couple times. You deserve credit for that. I hope you had a lovely trip. Welcome back to the nation's capital.
Thank you.
Of course, I'm referring to the great Kaylee Lyons, who's back with us today. People are getting tired of hearing me talk. So great to see you. Welcome back. You came back just in time for a whole bunch of breakers.
Yeah.
You come back, Kevin McCarthy leaves. I don't know if those are connected. But you were up there on the Hill earlier today.
I
There's kind of a
was.
weird feeling in the air. And
Yeah, it was
the
weirdly
Capitol.
quiet.
Mhm.
It was cold outside. It
Yep.
was kind of doing a weird rain snow thing. And
is reality setting in that actually nothing's going to get done this year or
Possibly.
next?
It felt a little bit bleak, to be honest. A number of people just didn't really feel like talking to me. And perhaps
How
it was
about that?
because they didn't have much good or positive to say, as it feels like there is very much not a lot happening on Capitol
Mm-hmm.
Hill, even if we're going to see a vote in the Senate later today on something that is very likely going to fail.
Or they had abandonment complex,
Or that.
like I did with Kaylee gone. Either way, Joe Biden's losing patience, Kaylee. He actually spoke from the White House earlier today, telling everybody to get with it.
Yep.
This isn't the vote, but there's an important test vote, if we can call it that, in the Senate on Ukraine. Let's hear from the president a bit earlier. The message, let's get moving.
This cannot wait. Congress needs to pass supplemental funding for Ukraine before they break for the holiday resources. As simple as that. Frankly, I think it's stunning that we've gotten to this point in the first place. While Republicans in Congress are willing to give Putin the greatest gift he could hope for and abandon our global leadership, not just in Ukraine, but beyond that.
The problem is that vote's going to fail.
Yeah.
And there doesn't seem to be a path for this in any form. Senate and House don't agree. President unlikely to get the combined money he's asking for. And look, not a lot's changed since you've left in reality. We're still talking about this hinging on a border deal that has yet to emerge.
Yeah, exactly. And even the Senate Minority Leader, Mitch McConnell, who very much wants additional Ukraine funding, has made it tied to the border issue.
Mm-hmm.
And it feels like it's just a lot of pieces of a puzzle and no one's having much success in putting it together.
Sure.
Thinking we might be against a clock here by year end, unclear whether or not that happens. But come the end of the year and the start of the next one, Joe, the House is going to look a little different. The Republicans are actually going to be working with a smaller majority because Kevin
Absolutely
McCarthy
right.
will be gone.
If you do the math, Mick Mulvaney was talking to us as well. Watch Bill Johnson. We could be in a world where there's like a 2 or 3 seat majority
Yeah.
by February, March. I don't know how this is. I don't
And
know.
we already thought things were difficult to pass.
I was feeling optimistic yesterday. We had Rick Davis and Jim Kessler. They kept saying, Joe, it's darkest before dawn. All this crazy talk you're hearing, no one can agree, means they're probably on the verge of a deal. Then I woke up this morning. I don't feel that way anymore, and I think they were lying to me. Maybe Terry can help me out here. Terry will talk me in off the ledge. Terry Haynes, of course, Pangea Policy is with us. Live from Washington now. Terry, what's your thought? Glass half full, half empty here. Who do you believe? Because with everything that I've been hearing since this morning, I'm feeling like nothing gets passed this year. We're going to shut down. Ukraine's not going to get any money. Nothing can happen in this Congress, can it?
On this, sure. But two things have to happen. First, this vote this afternoon in the Senate has to fail because that's necessary for a lot of people, including Democratic Leader Schumer, to be able to turn to their colleagues and say, now, see, we can't get this done without doing something serious on border security. Otherwise, it doesn't happen. And I can tell you from talking to a number of Republicans, including a couple of senators over the past few days, the way Republicans see this is very simple. You're either going to have something on border, in which case aid gets done. But if the Democrats aren't willing to deal on border in some substantial way to improve the border, then very likely nothing's going to happen for a while. And Republicans feel like they have the politics on their side, of course, and they also feel like they have the public with them, because you can pull any poll out of your pocket and show that 3/4 to 8/10 of the American public agree that the border is a terrible problem and something needs to be done about it. So this is a matter of the sooner Democrats figure out they need to do something on the border, and a lot of them are talking about this. Even a progressive like Peter Welch, a very thoughtful guy, has been talking about the need to do something substantial on the border. So the sooner they get to that, the sooner you actually get a deal.
Terry, does that actually have to be driven, though, not by Democrats in the Senate or in the House, but the White House? As you say, the border is a sensitive political issue. We have voters that are going to be heading to the polls in less than a year to vote for who they would like to be president of the United States. Is it Biden that needs to be more deeply engaged in this?
Well, Biden certainly put this on the table first, Kaylee. And I'm glad you put it this way. Let's remember, this is the president's construct. It's the president that said, and the White House continues to repeat, Admiral Kirby particularly, repeat that, what they want is they want Israel aid, Ukraine aid, they want the Indo-Pacific aid, as they call it, and they want something on the border as well. So this is the president's construct, whether Democrats like it or not, number one. Number two, what I'd say about the president very simply is that he's got little to no political capital to achieve anything. What the White House, and the White House actually shows you this, what they like to do is, kind of issue the thunderbolts from on high, as Biden did most recently on the need to get something done on Ukraine. Well, if, I can hear the Republican response in my head, which is, if you'd actually sent the weapons on time, if you'd actually, told us with some more alacrity that we needed aid, as soon as possible, rather than just asking for it as part of a package, maybe we'd be in a little bit of a different place. But they're not, and he's not. But he's not really able to move the needle on this. This is going to be much more up to Leader Schumer than anybody else.
Well, so Terry, what's the lightning bolt that unlocks a deal on the border? And I know that's an impossible question really to answer. We've been trying to do this for 20 or 30 years, but we keep hearing that Democrats are open to changes in asylum law, that there actually is more progress and there's more common ground than we think there is, because they'd all love to campaign on this next year, is the fact. But when you have Mike Johnson saying, take H.R. 2 or nothing, we can't seem to get out of the blocks here. What do you think?
Well, we're in the ask for too much phase of these negotiations, but then and in part there's, I think, a lack of communication going on here. Republicans continue to ask for too much, and HR 2 is, from a political perspective, from a deal making perspective, is certainly too much. But the Republicans keep asking for that in part because they feel like they're not getting enough signal from the Democratic side. Democratic side says they're being open, but then again aren't really putting specifics on the table. So I point to this as you did in the previous hour. I point to the test vote this afternoon, this evening in the Senate as a forcing event that allows Democratic leadership to say, look, we need to get serious on this if we're going to get something done, and also allows McConnell, because this is a Senate game much more than a House game, allows McConnell to also say to his people, look, now the time's come to get serious. Let's get serious and get the best we can get. By all means, let's get something, not just money, but also let's get some substantive improvements. But we've got 2 more weeks after this one, and we're pretty much done. So let's figure this out. And the parties, whatever else you can say about the parties, they've been sitting here for 10 years doing nothing on border and immigration issues, and it's about time. So they know their limits. They know what they can do, and if there's willingness on the Democratic side, I think you'll see some joining hands in the end. I called this at the beginning of the week as about a 70% likelihood to get done before Christmas. I'll stick with that today.
All right, Terry, fair enough. That's the probability of something happening before the Christmas, New Year holiday. Speaking of the New Year, as Joe and I were chatting about earlier, come the New Year, there will be one less member of the Republican conference, and it happens to be a former speaker, the first who was ever ousted, Kevin McCarthy. Today he says, I'm done. He actually released a video announcement from that. Let's just take a listen.
Now, it is time to pursue my passion in a new arena. While I'll be departing the House at the end of this year, I will never, ever give up fighting for this country that I love so much. To all those who have supported me through the years, especially our constituents, thank you from the bottom of my heart.
So, thank you.
Good choice of music. You like that?
It's quite
like a campaign ad.
majestic and yeah.
Did you hear the
Well-produced
mic
video.
drop? Did you see the mic drop at
Yeah,
the
can we-
end?
can we hear the
Terry,
mic
I don't know how you feel about this. You know, we have these big, beautiful mics that make a racket if we'd be very dramatic. Can you do that with a lavalier? You know, he takes it off the, here.
Thank you. God bless you, and God bless America.
Here we go.
That's a wrap.
Clunk, he throws the mic on the floor, and you almost couldn't hear it.
Nor a
But it was
lavalier.
dramatic to see.
Well, Terry, that's a wrap for Kevin McCarthy. I don't know if you find that surprising, but of course this follows Patrick McHenry saying he wasn't going to run again. There's been a series of these kinds of announcements. What do all of them together say to you?
A couple of things. Well, you know, let me say briefly about Mr. McCarthy that you know, what he'll be remembered for, in addition to the speakership, is he'll be remembered for being a major fundraiser for the party. You know, as Mick Mulvaney pointed out in the last hour, and secondly, he'll be remembered as a serious recruiter. I mean, somebody who, you know, really helped Republicans come back, get a majority, and maintain a majority for a lot longer than a lot more people thought they would. So, you know, he's had a successful political career regardless of what he does next. You know, what I think about this is, you know, let's remember, instead of thinking about, you know, what's happening today, let's remember what we were talking about a month ago. What we were talking about a month ago was Congress's inability to deal with, among other things, a looming fiscal crisis that, you know, regardless of how the bond market has responded in the past couple of weeks, it's still a fiscal crisis. Markets are still concerned about it. Debt's out of control, deficit's out of control. That's very much the perception. Fiscal spend is rising and, you know, perceived to be endless. So what I see in all this is, you know, frankly, a bunch of people who are you know, the good people who are tired of on both sides, who are tired of beating their heads against the wall. But I see the increasing irrelevance of Congress and the House in particular, and that's not a happy thing for me to say, but it's true. I think you get an awful lot of people who are concluding that they could do more and be better off in all senses, being outside the institution rather than being inside of it. And I think that's a bad thing. It's also a bad thing when you get people like Patrick McHenry, who, among other things, you know, everybody understands this now, you know, kind of started as a firebrand, reinvented himself as a substantive legislator with respect for the other side and a desire to kind of do deals and move the ball forward. You know, you get somebody like Mr. McHenry leaving, what you have is, you know, you're abandoning the place to kind of more of the firebrands, more of the people who think it's all about Team Red, Team Blue, exclusively. And you know, frankly, it accentuates the divergence between the increasing irrelevance of Washington, in, you know, compared to the kinds of things that the markets are concerned about politically and geopolitically, which are very, very fundamental. The inability of Congress to deal with this stuff is reaching a breaking point, and I think that's a bad thing.
Well, Terry, we're out of time, but you can't blame him, right? Do you blame Kevin McCarthy or Patrick McHenry? Wouldn't you do the same thing?
Oh, heavens, no. No, heavens. No, they, you know, both have served for nearly 20 years, and, you know, I'm all in favor of fresh blood, but these were people in a lot of ways that were still very much at the top of their game. So I'm sad from that perspective.
Kaylee, Terry Haynes says abandoning the place to the firebrands.
Yeah.
Maybe we can also say the inmates are running the asylum. I don't know. I think that might be the same. Terry, great to see you. Let's talk again before we go away for the holidays. From Pangea Policy, our friend Terry Haynes, live from Washington. Kaylee, we've got a lot more to talk about, including the banking hearing you just came from. We'll do that next.
Yeah.
This is Bloomberg.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
It's 2:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. A little change for the S&P 500 index right now. We are looking at a loss of just about 4 points. Dow Industrials holding on to a gain up by 18 points for the Dow. That's a gain of less than 0.1%. S&P down 0.1%. The Nasdaq Composite Index lower by 25 points, down by about 0.2%. The Russell 2000, though, up by 0.6%. 10-year yield 4.11%. We do have the 2-year yielding 4.59%. Spot gold up 0.5%, $20.29 the ounce. And West Texas Intermediate crude below $70 a barrel, $69.54 right now. WTI lower by about 3.8%. Bottom line here, stocks are struggling to gain traction. J.P. Morgan Chase CEO Jamie Dimon among bank executives testifying on Capitol Hill this morning. You heard a lot of the testimony live here on Bloomberg Radio. They were making their case for watering down rule proposals they argue will harm the economy. Dimon also had this to say.
Our nation should give thanks to Chairman Powell and Secretary Yellen for the tremendous work through some complicated economic times, including their work on sanctions following Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the steps they took during the regional bank turmoil this spring. These are excellent examples how regulators working with the industry collaboratively, sharing information transparently, can protect the financial system and the country.
And J.P. Morgan Chase shares down now by 0.7%. So again, recapping, looking at a mixed equity market right now. The Dow is higher, the S&P, Nasdaq, both in the red. S&P lower now by 4 points, a drop of just about 0.1%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
You're listening to Bloomberg Sound On with Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lines on Bloomberg Radio.
As we at last get to the stuff that Kaylee wants to talk about here, and by that I mean Basel III Endgame. Same for Nathan Dean. I should just preface this by saying there was a big hearing in Washington today. All the big bank CEOs were there. It was important enough to grab Kaylee Lines and get her all the way up to Capitol Hill as well. She was up there watching the lawmakers come in and out of the room. Think Jamie Dimon, Jane Fraser. These are all the big money center banks today, Kaylee. And, you know, I was looking around for what it is. What's the legislation they're working on here that would prompt such a hearing? And the chairman of the committee said this was about keeping them accountable.
Yeah.
For what?
It was an oversight hearing for the taxpayers who, if you all remember back to the financial crisis, had to bail out a lot of financial institutions. And that really comes down to the capital requirements conversation. When we say the Basel III Endgame, what we really mean is that there's been a proposal by bank regulators that essentially says banks have to keep more cash on the side.
Yep.
A greater ratio, if you will. Banks say that means they are going to lend out less if they have to have more money put aside. And that really is where that gets politically difficult. As Democrats say, you have really high profits, it shouldn't make a difference on how much you lend. And Republicans very much say that they shouldn't have to keep so much capital on the
So this message from the CEOs today that you're actually going to hurt consumers, hurt the economy, has to do largely with their ability to lend to people who need money.
And the rates at which they would do so.
We heard from Jamie Dimon. He, of course, one of the bold faces on the panel today. Here he is.
Mortgages and small business loans will be more expensive and harder to access, particularly for low to moderate income borrowers, as costs for originating and securitizing loans rise. Savings for retirement or college will yield lower returns as costs rise for asset managers, money market funds, and pension funds.
Now, we tend to call Dad for help on things like this, our dad here on the show, Nathan Dean. But I've got to tell you, he's the fleece vest was left at home. I feel more like it's brother Nathan today. Could we be brothers for today?
Sounds good.
Excellent. I'm flattered by that, of course. Now, Kaylee, this is the man we call when we get to Basel III Endgame, as you saw today. Where do we start with Mr. Nathan Dean here?
Well, I just wonder, Nathan, whether you think the needle really moved at all. Because as much as there was all of the talk, the bank CEOs having a platform, if you will, to say, we don't like this, please do something about this. The fact is, those senators in that room are not the ones that actually would be implementing the proposals. The regulators are. So are we left in any different of a place than we were before this hearing today,
So the whole point of the hearing from the bank perspective today was to put pressure on the Fed, and I think they did that. And they did that two ways. The first way, and we saw this with Jamie Dimon and with Morgan Stanley and Goldman Sachs' prepared remarks, they used words like cost-benefit analysis. When they are using cost-benefit analysis, they are telling the Fed, we better hope that you adhere to the Administrative Procedures Act, the APA. This is the law that requires that regulators must follow when they implement regulations. Because we don't think you've done the cost-benefit analysis, aka we may sue you after the finalization. And given today's Supreme Court, that lawsuit actually has some teeth to it. The other thing they did is they tried to persuade the moderate Democrats like Senator Tester and Senator Warner to continue to air their grievances, or at least their concerns with the proposal, because the Fed is up against the ropes right now. They have to try and finalize a rule with changes to the point where they can't have, they don't repropose it, so they don't trigger an APA violation. They have to get the moderate Democrats right, they have to get the progressive Democrats right, and they have to do it before the 2024 elections. So today was all about putting pressure on the Fed.
No regulators in the room. Wouldn't they be the ones to talk to about this? Why should the banks have so much input?
Well, that wasn't the intent of the hearing. This was an oversight hearing that the Senate Banking Committee holds on an annual basis. So Senator Sherrod Brown called this, and this is usually a way to, bash banks and try and push them into decisions like limiting overdraft fees. Bank of America CEO Brian Moynihan talked about that. But because the House Financial Services Committee didn't hold their version of this hearing, this gave the banks an opportunity to just air their grievances, a Festivus of sort, about the Basel III endgame. So it may have had a somewhat unintended effect from Sherrod Brown's perspective, because yes, you can bash the banks and you can see oversight, but at the same time, we're all watching, and we all watched, and I'm sure the Fed watched as well.
Did you just connect Basel III endgame to Festivus? This is
something only Dad could do.
Well, this is why Nathan comes in here. This is high level.
It's an art and a science, Joe.
It was a Festivus for the rest of us. There were no, however, feats of strength.
No.
But why not?
Well,
isn't that the authority that Congress brings to the table here?
Well,
it's time to flex. You've got all these guys in front of you here. Isn't that the point?
But it's also an election year, and legislation, we didn't hear much about legislation today. The one thing I would say is Elizabeth Warren, I think, did a very effective job in the crypto space on her crypto AML bill that she's been partnering up with a bunch of Republicans on, including Lindsey Graham. She was able to air her grievances about crypto and the connection between terrorism financing. She got the banks to agree that cryptocurrency should have the same amount of rigor as anti-money laundering, Bank Secrecy Act type systems that the banks fall under. So she got all the banks to agree to that, and she was also able to effectively, show her grievances to the colleagues, so that when this bill comes for a vote, they're more familiar with the issue.
Yeah, I think it was pretty telling that Elizabeth Warren, who by and large often in these hearings is one of the most contentious with those testifying when it is big banks or regulators, knowing that she has very much opposed big banks getting any bigger. She has a lot of thoughts on this industry, and the fact that she went to crypto when she had the 8 GSIB CEOs, meaning the global systemically important banks, in the room with her, I thought was really interesting. Also, that Jamie Dimon and her seem to have an area in which they agree. He said if he was the government, he'd get rid of crypto entirely.
Yeah, this is one of those situations where, strange, alliances come together, but it's indicative of the challenges that the cryptocurrency industry is going to face next year. I mean,
and they're going to face them without Patrick McHenry and financial services.
That's
exactly.
What I mean,
Patrick McHenry, I think with his announcement that he's not going to return, that ups the chances of a stablecoin bill coming in. I think he's going to really push for that stablecoin specific bill. But for this broader crypto framework that Coinbase and other companies are looking for, A, I don't think you're going to get it in 2024, and B, who's going to champion you in 2025?
Well, his name might be French Hill, right? We had him on the program last night. He is quite possibly going to be the next chair or ranking member, depending on what happens to the House majority. But he was adamant, and it's his job to say good things here and be upbeat. But he said stablecoin and crypto, broader crypto, will both be done before Chairman McHenry leaves the building? If not, though, Nathan, could he be the one to carry the mantle?
Yeah, absolutely. He could be the one to carry the mantle. My question to Representative Hill is how are you going to get it past Sherrod Brown? Because the House can do whatever it wants. It's a majority rule chamber. Then there's enough bipartisan support that I think both the stablecoin bill and the FIT, the Financial Innovation Technology Act that Chairman McHenry is pushing, can pass the House. Problem is how you get it past Sherrod Brown, because you have the Senate. And I think there are enough crypto-skeptic lawmakers over on the Senate side. They're like, look, we just don't need to really do anything.
Well, can you get it past Maxine Waters? I mean, would she sign off on something that might make it more palatable for?
I don't think she has to. I mean, I think she'll sign off on a stablecoin bill. Sure. I don't think she needs to. I don't think she'll sign off on this broader crypto bill. But the ultimate thing here is you need Congress to pass this legislation, and I think eventually they could probably get there, maybe 2025. But in the interim, Chairman Gary Gensler is going to continue to bring enforcement cases, and the courts are going to begin to opine on them. Which side ultimately has the most leverage? We think the courts eventually will, but Congress still has to wait until they feel that pressure.
What a cycle.
Well, it's interesting to me that crypto legislation is something that could pass the House and not the Senate, and yet there's been legislation that's passed in the relevant committee, the Senate Banking Committee in the Senate, and there's been a little bit more hesitancy on the House side. That's safer banking when it comes to marijuana companies' access to the U.S. banking system, and that actually came up in the bank CEO's hearing today as well, and it didn't seem like they were super enthused. What was your read on that?
So, the question was, this was from Senator Warnock, was do you support the Safer Banking Act? And none of the CEOs really raised their hand. And from what our perspective is, we don't think that changes the needle all that much, because the big bank CEOs were never going to get involved in marijuana banking. As long as it's federally illegal, they are never going to do it, as opposed for concerns of AML and the Bank Secrecy Act. The revenue is just not worth the risk. And so when it comes to safer banking, it's those smaller banks and credit unions out there are the ones that are ultimately going to take that on. Now, we don't think safer banking is going to pass next year solely because of Speaker Johnson. I think it could eventually pass the Senate. It'll go to the House, but there's just too many folks over there that just aren't comfortable yet with the idea of integrating marijuana into our financial system. And so, again, that's going to be a 2025 issue. If you're in the marijuana equity space, you may not enjoy that all that much.
That's something else that just never seems to go away as a story. We're out of time, but there was a new letter from a number of governors to the president to see that rescheduling happens by the end of the year as promised. Is that forgotten?
We've heard rumors it could happen any weekday now.
Is that right?
We've heard rumors that it will happen months from now. So I've also heard rumors it may not happen before the election.
Great to have you.
Thank you.
Brother Nathan. I feel like that's like the way that sounds.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sure.
Nathan Dean. Don't worry, Dad will be back next time. I'm Joe Matthew. Let's get you up to date with Nancy Lyons in the Bloomberg 99.1 newsroom in Washington. Hi, Nancy.
Thanks, Joe. President Biden, in a national address today, reprimanded Republicans in Congress over stalled talks to pass a new round of aid to Ukraine. The GOP wants immigration reform as part of any aid package.
Republicans think they get everything they want without any bipartisan compromise. That's not the answer. That's not the answer. And now they're willing to literally kneecap Ukraine on the battlefield and damage our national security in the process.
Biden says doing nothing would be a victory for Russia. He was the first House Speaker to be kicked out of the position by his own members. Now Kevin McCarthy is taking himself out of the House entirely.
The Republican from Bakersfield, California, made the announcement in a Wall Street Journal essay and on this video posted on X.
While I'll be departing the House at the end of this year, I will never, ever give up fighting for this country that I love so much.
McCarthy came to office in 2010 with a wave of Tea Party Republicans. It took 15 votes for him to become Speaker in January, a tenure that lasted just 9 months when 8 conservatives joined with Democrats to kick him out of the chair. In Washington, I'm Nathan Hager, Bloomberg Radio.
Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Nancy Lyons. This is Bloomberg.
Headlines and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
It's 2:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg and Bloomberg Sound On, brought to you by the Jewish Communal Fund. JCF helps you to respond to crisis swiftly. Open your JCF Donor Advised Fund now to secure your tax deduction. Visit jcfny.org or call 212-752-8277. Stocks continue to struggle to gain traction following a rally driven by bets the Federal Reserve will be cutting rates next year. S&P 500 index lower, little change, down 2 points, a drop there of less than 0.1%. The Dow right now up 18 points. That is a gain of less than 0.1%. The Nasdaq 100 index down 22, lower by 0.1%. The Nasdaq Composite Index down by about 0.1%. But the Russell 2000 index of small cap shares keeps moving higher, up another 10, up now by about 0.6%. 10-year yield 4.11%. The 2-year 4.59%. Gold up $10 the ounce to $20.30, higher by about 0.5%. Crude oil, big story there, $69.31 a barrel, falling below $70, down right now by 4.1%. Industry data suggests hiring slowed in November. And with that story, here's Bloomberg's Vinny Del Giudice.
Payroll processor ADP says businesses added 103,000 jobs, the year's second lowest reading. Factories cut jobs. Leisure and hospitality, a driver of post-pandemic employment growth, also cut back. ADP's report sets the stage for Friday's official data. Meantime, the trade deficit widened in October as exports fell and third quarter productivity was revised up. Vinny Del Giudice, Bloomberg Radio.
Toll Brothers shares on the rise as the homebuilders executives point to solid demand in recent weeks as mortgage rates pull back from 2-decade highs. Right now, we do have Toll Brothers up by 2.7%. Again, recapping, little change for the U.S. stock market. S&P right now down by 2 points. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
You're listening to Bloomberg Sound On with Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lines on Bloomberg Radio.
They're still talking about the hearing, not the bank CEOs today, but the college presidents yesterday. We spent some time on this. But 24 hours later, Kaylee, I feel like this has become actually a bigger story.
Yeah.
The presidents of Harvard, MIT, UPenn grilled on anti-Semitism and free speech on campus. And it really seems to have come down to one exchange in particular. Elise Stefanik, though, looming large in that hearing. A lot of folks learned about her yesterday. A lot of folks learned that she went to Harvard.
Yes.
And I think she just kind of popped up on a lot of people's radars with some very difficult back and forths here with these presidents.
With each one essentially asking them the very same question. And it has ignited on social media. I think it's fair to say, Joe, we should take a
for
listen
sure.
to the
This is
exchanges.
somewhat extended, but I feel like we need to play the whole thing. This is not edited at all. Representative Elise Stefanik, of course, a Republican, a member of the leadership, talking with Liz McGill, the president of UPenn. Here we go.
At Penn, does calling for the genocide of Jews violate Penn's rules or code of conduct? Yes or no?
If the speech turns into conduct, it can be harassment. Yes.
I am asking specifically calling for the genocide of Jews. Does that constitute bullying or harassment?
If it is directed and severe or pervasive, it is harassment.
So the answer is yes.
It is a context-dependent decision, Congresswoman.
It's a context-dependent decision. That's your testimony today. Calling for the genocide of Jews is depending upon the context. That is not bullying or harassment. This is the easiest question to answer yes, Ms. McGill. So is your testimony that you will not answer yes?
If it if the
yes
speech
or
becomes,
no?
if the speech becomes conduct, it can be harassment. Yes.
Conduct meaning committing the act of genocide? The speech is not harassment? This is unacceptable, Ms. McGill. I'm going to give you one more opportunity for the world to see your answer. Does calling for the genocide of Jews violate Penn's code of conduct when it comes to bullying and harassment? Yes or no?
It can be harassment.
The answer is yes.
Just a tortured exchange. She had a very similar one, in fact, with the president of Harvard as well, Claudine Gay. Look at Bill Ackman's tweet. I just got a call from one of Harvard's most respected and generous alums. His first words were, "Bill, promise me it was a deep fake." Yeah. It was not, Kaylee.
It was not. And Bill Ackman is not the only well-known Wall Street titan who has come out and has had very harsh words for the presidents of these universities.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. And so we're kind of balancing this idea of free speech and hate speech, and a conversation that we were looking forward to having with John Pushinsky, adjunct professor of law at the University of Pittsburgh, an expert in First Amendment and campus law, just the person we need here, Professor. I appreciate your joining us. I'm sure you have strong feelings about what we heard yesterday here, but my goodness, couldn't these college presidents have been better prepared?
It sounded to me like they were prepared. What I was thinking, listening to the exchange and the excerpts I heard yesterday, is that Representative Stefanik has very little understanding of what the First Amendment means and what it protects.
Okay, so John, help us make that distinction. When we're thinking about First Amendment rights, the right to free speech, where is the line?
First of all, it's important to emphasize that the advocacy as an academic proposition or as an individual preference of any particular group, no matter how abhorrent that advocacy may be, is protected speech under the First Amendment. According to a long line of Supreme Court cases, the line drawn between protected speech and unprotected speech is when the speech becomes a true threat. And that means that there has to be advocacy to incite or produce imminent lawless action. So in other words, in the 1940s and the 1950s, there may have been campus discussions about whether worldwide revolution was something that people should work towards. And the discussions of overthrowing governments, even by violent means, was deemed to be protected because it's only people exploring and discussing what they believe as opposed to inciting or producing imminent lawless action. When I teach my First Amendment class, I invite the students to think about President Trump standing in front of the Capitol or away from the Capitol on the mall, telling people, let's go stop the steal, go to the Capitol, whether that is just advocacy or whether there was really an incitement to produce imminent lawless action, which is the legal line to be drawn. The tough problem that a lot of the universities have is that there's also a federal statute known as Title VI that prohibits discrimination on a number of bases, including religion, from programs or activities receiving federal financial assistance. So they may have statutory duties that are separate and apart from First Amendment responsibilities. Also, we should note that the three schools who spoke at Congress yesterday, Penn, Harvard, and MIT, are all private universities, and the First Amendment doesn't apply.
Well, that's where I want to get to with you here, because I appreciate the point that you're making, Professor, and I apologize for interrupting. You could probably kick me out of your class for that. But look, these are presidents of private universities talking about their code of conduct, right? Their code of ethics here in a congressional hearing. Why seek nuance in that case? Why not give them a yes or no? This is what people think is wrong with these universities.
Well, because the terms that were being bandied about don't have definitions that everybody understands the same way. I've had debates with people as to what genocide means, and there are a lot of people who attach definitions different than the UN definition of genocide. We heard Representative Stefanik or others use the term hate speech, but what does that mean? If I say I don't like you and you don't belong in my neighborhood, is that hate speech? Now, universities have the right to create codes of conduct, but they are also academic institutions that traditionally believe in debate, exploration of ideas. And the fear that I have is that if you prohibit certain speech and certain ideas, you don't stop those ideas. You don't stop that speech. You drive it underground where you have much less control over it than when it's out in the open. I mean, Justice Holmes on the Supreme Court taught us that the way to fight bad speech is to counter it with good speech.
So, Professor, if I'm understanding you correctly, when you're actually looking at the legal matters here, the difficulty in assigning specific definitions to a lot of this language, you actually think that these college presidents are approaching this in the right way, at least from a legal standpoint. You don't see much wrong here.
Well, I'm not sure how. I'm not very familiar with what's happening on each of the three campuses. So I don't believe that I can comment on whether they are approaching what's happening on their campuses correctly. If there are actual threats against individuals, or if people are being intimidated, then the universities may have an affirmative duty to take corrective action.
Well, Professor, I don't know what's going to come of that hearing yesterday, but it seems to me that lawmakers can do whatever they want, and it's really money that we're talking about here in donations. Those folks like Bill Ackman, who we mentioned, and Mitt Romney, who are protesting now, giving $1 instead of thousands or $1 million to these schools, might in fact affect change. You might not want to answer this, but do you think all three of these presidents will still have their jobs a year from now?
I don't. It's not a question of whether I want to answer. I don't know what the answer is, but I do believe that those who withhold donations because they're not happy with what's happening are exercising their First Amendment rights to express their displeasure with the way the university presidents have handled the situation. And that might be a productive means of effecting change. One thing that I am concerned about when I hear calls for expelling students or from suspending students for exercising an unpopular opinion or view is that it doesn't really solve anything. What I believe the more way to respond would be for the universities to create teaching moments. And if someone has violated the code of conduct through speech or through participation in a demonstration where no one is really threatened or where there is no incitement to imminent lawless action, it might be more productive to have a teaching moment with that student, to have the student study actual history, to write a paper on the issue of what was to be done by the world with the Jews after the Holocaust who had no place to go without the threat of being killed apart from their traditional historic home.
Professor, we appreciate your weighing in on this. There are obviously no easy answers here, and that's why we appreciate your trying to answer them. John Prushinsky, Adjunct Professor of Law, University of Pittsburgh, with us here on Bloomberg Sound On. We thank you for joining, sir. Want to update you on trading. We haven't touched this in a minute because we've been dealing with so many breaking stories today. Charlie Pellet has the latest on Wall Street in New York. Hi, Charlie.
Thank you very much, Joe Matthew. We have got the Dow higher, S&P, NASDAQ, both in the red. Little change. Key takeaway right now, likely little change right through Friday morning, 8:30 a.m. when we get that jobs report. 3-point drop right now in the S&P at 45.63, down by about 0.1%. We've got the Dow up 11 off session highs. Little change there as well. NASDAQ down 17, decline of 0.1%. 10-year yield 4.11%, 2-year 4.59%. Spot gold up $9 the ounce, up 0.5%. Crude now down 4%, 69.40 a barrel. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That, Joe Matthew, is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, that's the man, Charlie. Thank you. Let's turn now to world and national news. While we're here in Washington, Nancy Lyons covers that in the Bloomberg 99.1 newsroom. Hi, Nancy.
Hey, Joe. President Biden says he is not ready to walk away from Ukraine, and he's challenging Congress not to walk away either. A Senate vote on Biden's supplemental request for aid to Ukraine and Israel is set for later today.
Make no mistake, today's vote's going to be long remembered, and history's going to judge harshly those who turn their back on freedom's cause. We can't let Putin win. Say it again, we can't let Putin win.
Biden says the failure to approve aid to Ukraine would be the greatest gift the U.S. could give to Russia. Former House Speaker Kevin McCarthy says he will leave the House at the end of the year. He made the announcement in a video on X.
Giving my best to all of you has been my greatest honor. I'm proud of what we have accomplished.
McCarthy became the first speaker to be ousted. That was back in October. He did not say what his next steps would be, but in a Wall Street Journal op-ed, he did say he'd help recruit new political candidates. The heads of the nation's biggest banks say there are reasons to be concerned about the health of U.S. consumers, particularly poor and low-income borrowers. But they're concerned that the Biden administration's new proposed regulations for the industry could hurt the U.S. economy. They testified on Capitol Hill today. This is J.P. Morgan Chase CEO Jamie Dimon.
The debate should not always be about more or less regulation, about the right regulations to keep America's banking system the best in the world. I urge lawmakers and regulators to be thoughtful about the effect of arbitrary and unstudied regulatory proposals and their cumulative impact on the economy.
Jamie Dimon says the proposal, while designed to mitigate risk, would actually increase risk with a shift to less regulated markets that would be out of the eyesight of regulators. The proposed regulations would require big banks to hold additional capital on their balance sheets. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Nancy Lyons. Now back to you, Joe and Kaylee.
All right, Nancy, thank you. As we consider the person of the year, you saw it coming, didn't you, Kaylee? Taylor Swift's featured prominently in the Fed's Beige Book. That's the extent to which I'm familiar with her work.
Wow.
Looming large here as the person of the year. Now, and look, being actually serious in this case, I had heard of her before the Beige Book. I didn't confuse her with Britney. That's a whole other story. That was the other old guy. But there have been questions about what the end of her tour might mean for the economy in the new year.
Yeah, well, she's already done with the U.S., at least for this round. I believe she comes back to New Orleans at some point next year.
Is that right?
But it has been, along with Beyonce and the tour that she has been doing, a huge driver.
It's like a stimulus bill.
It kind of, yes. People shell out for these tickets.
Right.
Because we are talking about the queens here.
Prompting not only that, but local hiring, a boost for ancillary business. They have like an algorithm for this. These tours roll into town and you can count on like $1 billion.
Yes.
So when you take that away and everyone starts paying their student loans again, what are you left with?
The answer might be not that much.
I don't know.
Which is why we continue to talk about the soft landing or
big
not.
R, yeah.
Maybe if the Eras Tour just continued perpetually, the landing would indeed be soft. I don't know, Joe.
You know, while you were...
And we need a new Barbie movie as well while we're at it.
That was another stimulus. Barbenheimer. While you were gallivanting around the world, by the way, Bloomberg Economics took a victory lap, having been called out for being wrong on their 100% chance of a recession. Anna Wong sat right in that chair. Based on her research, it started in October.
Ooh.
We'll talk more about that.
We should.
With Kaylee Lyons, I'm Joe Matthews. She's back. Bloomberg Business Week starts right now.
This is Bloomberg Business Week. Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine. Plus, global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Tim Stenivek on Bloomberg Radio.
And a very good afternoon, everybody. Happy Hump Day on this December 6th, 2023.
Happy Friday to you.
Happy, I know.
You know, enjoy this voice, Carol's that is, while you can, because Carol's got a little bit of a vacation coming up.
I'm doing that experiential thing that everybody's been doing. I'm tired of buying stuff, and I'm going places, so heading overseas.
That's what I've said about that. I said that about you for years. She's going places. She's going places.
You know who's going places? Taylor Swift.
She is, yeah, Person of the Year. We're gonna, we'll talk a little bit about that in today's program. Not surprised. Are you surprised?
No, I think it's a super, super smart choice.
Yeah.
I mean, if you think about how many times we have talked about her this year on, yes, her music, her performances, her concerts, the amount of money, her movie, but she does make her way into our economic conversations.
Yeah.
She moves the needle.
I actually had a group of friends talking about this who are not at all involved in business news or they don't work on Wall Street or anything. And they couldn't believe her economic impact. And I just sent them the group text, a dozen articles from Bloomberg about Taylor Swift and what the Fed has said about her, beige book, what it comes, revenge spending, that sort of stuff, and they were into it.
It's real, right? It really just makes so much sense. Anyway, we'll work that in somewhere. Also, wait, what? Is this 2008 Wall Street big bank CEOs up on Capitol Hill?
No, but it's the annual Wall Street oversight hearing before the U.S. Senate Banking Committee. We've got all the headlines, and also Shonali joining us a little later. She's down on Capitol Hill.
Yeah, Kat Doherty, too.
Yeah, Kat Doherty as well. That's right. Mark Patrickhoff is going to come by.
Looking forward to this. Our Jillian Town had written a story last week, and his firm, works with athletes and sports entrepreneurs. They too invest in private equity, find investments. His firm and a big bunch of athletes, you're going to know their names, investing in the sports education company IMG Academy, which I wasn't that familiar with, have kind of done a deep dive, but we're going to talk about that investment and where it's all going.
You could have gone there, Carol, in high school.
For $80,000.
Yeah, it's a lot of money. And, maybe gone and played D1. I don't know.
I could have gone somewhere.
Yes. Yesterday was drugs in space. Today it's mining in space. Or from the heavens, anyone?
Yeah, I love this story. I love this whole idea, the space exploration, what's going on. Richard Edelman, constantly talking with top leaders. He's going to join us on the firm's Climate Trust Barometer post COP28. And then guess what? It's the 12 days of Christmas. Not going to set you back like it did last year, but man, those lords of leaping.
It's going to cost you.
They don't come cheap. All right, everybody. To the markets, to our TV colleagues. Countdown to the close starts now.
Countdown to the close. Bloomberg's comprehensive cross-platform coverage ahead of the U.S. market close starts right now.
This is the countdown to the close. Romaine Bostick alongside Scarlett Fu. We're joined right now by our colleagues Carol Masser and Tim Stenivek. Welcome to our audiences in full across all of our Bloomberg platforms, television, radio, originals, and our partnership for those folks streaming on YouTube. Carol Masser, what are you watching today?
Romaine Bostick, I am watching this great and funny story, interesting story out from about Morgan Stanley and what their analysts were doing apparently over the weekend. They spent, a bunch of them did, one in particular, noticing joggers in Central Park and trying to really get information about the kind of sneakers that they were wearing. And I think about all the hedge fund dudes that are out there, right? And they kind of rely on alternate data. Myself, I kind of have been watching and obsessed with Teslas that are in my neighborhood. It's an urban neighborhood, city neighborhood. They're parked on the streets, but I've just seen an increase. But anyway,
data. I mean,
joggers.
you think these Wall Street folks, it's all spreadsheets and Excel and computers and terminals and stuff, but they're out in Central Park doing anecdotal, looking at shoes. It actually reminds me of back in 2018. Michael Grimes over at Morgan Stanley. Do you guys remember when he was trying to win business for Uber's IPO? He actually came out and said that he spent years moonlighting as an Uber driver to try to win that business.
That's research.
But this is what analysts used to do, and I love this story. And I mean, I don't know how representative Central Park is for the broader sneaker market, but that's a whole other conversation.
Mall might be better.
But when I started my career, I mean, you would talk to these, particularly on the retail side, and look, I mean, they would just hang out at malls. They would hang out in stores. Remember when Silicon Valley and the tech scene was blowing up overseas? Remember, analysts would go out there and count the number of cars in the parking lot at 7 o'clock at night to determine whether these companies were really working hard and innovating. So some of that boots on the ground thing, I mean, obviously it's anecdotal data effectively, but it does provide some value.
Yeah.
Just, I don't know.
Apple analysts used to go to the stores every time there would be a new Apple phone launch, right? And sit there and count how many people were there and check out how many phones they're buying.
What shoes are you wearing, Carol?
I have heels on. 3-inch heels right now.
Okay.
But
so you're not
I will say we did recently interview the CEO of On Running, and we both wanted to try the shoes. Carol actually went out and bought a pair this weekend. She wore them in today.
I gotta say, that store was packed.
Well, that's kind of one of the points of the story is that the barrier to entry in the competitive running shoe market is relatively low, given the dominance of Hoka over the last few years, and then upstarts like On. I mean, together, those two brands, at least according to this analyst in Central Park, account for more than what they saw from Nike over the weekend in Central Park. So,
yeah, pretty telling.
Yeah, it is pretty telling.
So speaking of
dominance,
dominance,
that's just for runners, right?
Yeah, just for runners.
I mean, in fairness, some of these sneaker companies get a lot more of their business from just people.
I have a pair of Hokas, and I have no intention of running.
Just people like Carol Massler who just like walking around.
wearing your On sneakers to McDonald's or something. I want to bring up McDonald's because there's a great story here about how McDonald's is looking to turbo expand its locations. It's got about 41,000 restaurants or just over that amount. It wants to get to 50,000 locations around the world by 2027. That is an increase of 22% in a 4-year span. I mean, are they going to change up the menu? I mean, do we not have enough McDonald's?
What's wrong with McNuggets? They are perfect.
I don't know what Carol Massler's talking about, but can we talk about the jump from 41,000? I feel like we went down this road before. A couple CEOs ago, I can't remember the guy's name, but he tried something similar. It was basically like, we need to expand our footprint. And,
was this
expansion of
Easter
footprint
or else?
comes with a certain degree of costs, so you have to do it smartly, and it obviously did not work out, and he is not there anymore. Sorry, go ahead, Carol, with your nuggets.
Nothing. I just, I was talking to Tim about recently stopping kind of in search of a bathroom on a road trip, and I stopped in a McDonald's between here in Washington or Virginia, and it was gorgeous. Like, they have redone them.
Yes.
I really do think that they have been working around their menus in a big way to kind of reach some of the changing food trends that are out there.
They've removed all those orange and yellow chairs that look like the New York City subway and replaced it with stainless steel and like some faux wood paneling.
Cool, right?
And they're also experimenting with different formats that are, drive-through only or to help with ordering this stuff online. I don't know if you guys know this, I learned that Happy Meals aren't just for kids. Carol told me this.
I found this out. You know why? Because a couple of our producers were like ordering them like a couple weeks ago because there was some toy that they all wanted, and I was like, what? They all brought them in.
No idea.
Years ago, they had baby Beanie Babies. It was crazy.
You're really dating yourself, Carol.
Do you remember during the Olympics when they had the little tabs that you could scratch off to see if the U.S. was going to win?
I'm sorry.
Dating myself.
Carol's not dating herself. Scarlett's dating herself. Because I do remember that. I think I was about 2 years old when that happened. But that was a really big deal. But I used to beg my mother to collect those, but she just wouldn't.
I'm just saying it's kind of interesting. We'll see whether or not that growth vision works.
All right, so we'll see you guys in 2027. We'll be back.
This was fun.
Waddle, waddle, quack, quack, waddle, waddle.
Whoa, that was kind of precious. All right, we're going to be back in less than an hour's time. We're going to count you down to the close on this Wednesday. Radio, TV, YouTube, Bloomberg Originals. Join us for Beyond the Bell. Well, it's kind of interesting. It does feel like, speaking of control, that takes me back too. But I do think the Fed's going to feel pretty good right now because Here we are just a few days ahead of the U.S. jobs report. Economic data showing private payrolls increased 103,000 last month, trailing estimates.
I thought we didn't care about ADP.
Yeah, but you know what?
I'm
I feel
sorry.
like it's bum this week.
We only care about it when we care about it.
That's true, but
Okay.
it's the accumulation of jobs data that we are getting this week, like
Okay.
it or not. We are of course counting down to Friday's government print. It's forecast to show employers added 185,000 jobs in the month of November. Unemployment rate seen holding at the highest level in nearly 2 years. There's lots of pieces to that report, but it does feel like a slowing in the economy and a slowing of the jobs market. It's not falling apart. And as we heard from Mike McKee on that JOLTS report, like it wasn't like everything all of a sudden stopped, even though it was below that 9 million mark.
Well, we got a great roundtable here in our Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio. Bloomberg News economics editor Molly Smith is here, along with Bloomberg News rates reporter Michael McKenzie, who joins us here in the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio as well. Molly, I want to start with you because they
really
call
want to ask
you...
them about McDonald's, right? Do they eat at McDonald's? Yeah.
Well, I want to ask Carol a question, actually.
Is it about Beanie Babies?
Can I? I know this is
Yeah,
your show.
but first I want to introduce you as Molly Soft Landing Smith because
Thank you.
You've been, talking about the soft landing for months at this point. Anyway, go ahead though.
Hold that
please.
thought. Hold
Yeah.
that thought. I just wanted to say, Carol, I feel like you were just saying before that you don't buy any stuff, but then you just told us you went in and bought the OnCloud sneakers.
You know what? You're absolutely right. But
Which
I
is
like,
it?
That's a really good point. But I'm very selective. No. But I'm very selective. Like I'm getting ready for a trip. I know I'm going to do a lot of walking. The sneakers I have are old and they're not great, and I needed something good.
Okay,
But I'm
that's
very clean out mode. Too much stuff at home.
And
Yeah,
you
that's
want
a
to
good
do
point.
your
Yeah.
part, Carol, to support the economy. You talk about this economic data every day, and you want to contribute to it.
Yeah.
That's why I bought a hat on Black Friday. My mom told me I was looking for a reason not to buy the hat. She said you wanted to support the economy, so I bought the hat.
All right, so let's talk about the economy. The labor market's so important to keeping it going. The data today, what was worth noting, or should we just kind of brush it off because it's ADP? Sorry, ADP.
No, I mean I know I feel for him every time.
We do. We kind of diss them.
I feel like the way we were actually talking about it this morning was like, because sometimes we debate, should we, when we're writing the story, is there a market reaction to this? Because I think that tells you right then and there who really cares about this report. And it seems like there was a little bit of movement today. So it was like, okay, I guess people care about this. So maybe yields moving lower on the day and stocks were moving higher at one point. So yeah, maybe we should care about it today.
Well, Michael,
perhaps.
in terms of market reaction, was there something significant? It feels like once again we've got yields lower.
Not significant. Yes, yields are a touch lower. The pricing in, we're sort of still hanging around pricing in about 5 rate cuts for next year.
It's amazing.
March rate cut is a coin toss, slightly above 50% odds. This is a market that feels pretty comfortable. We overshot above 5% in October.
Yeah.
We've had a nice rally, but we're still nowhere near the low in yields we saw back in April when the 10-year was at 325 and the 2-year was hitting 350. So there's still, this is a bond market that's sort of in watch mode. The data is moving in the right direction, but it's a bond market that could rally a lot more if the data really starts to decelerate. And I think that's what the market's waiting to see. And it's probably more a story for early next year.
Yeah.
But again, they're also cognizant that next week you've got CPI to come on the first day of the 2-day Fed meeting, and then the Fed itself.
Projections.
And then I think the key here is Powell during his press conference going to try and push back on the bond market rally here? Or does he continue to see, along with other Fed officials who've recently spoke before the blackout period began, they seem pretty comfortable because yields are only back to where they were in July. So, that seems to be the way it's traveling at the moment.
I've got so many different directions I want to go with you, but I'll choose one.
Sure.
There's sort of this, yes, yields could rally more, or bonds could rally more, but at the same time, the decline from 5% just a few weeks ago to where we are right now, just above 4.1%, seems like a really drastic move in a very short time.
It does, but if we think about the climb,
I'm talking about the 10-year,
above 4% in August. So in the beginning of August, 10 years was sold just under 4%. We then shot above 5. We've now come back. And I think that's how people in the bond market are looking at it. We overshot on the way up. We've now come back. Ultimately, if you step back and say, okay, inflation is going to get to 2%, the economy is going to grow at 2%, that's a 4% 10-year. That's kind of a rough rule of thumb. And real yields, the inflation-adjusted yield, which is the true cost of borrowing in the economy, they're still holding in around 2%. So that tells you that we are pretty tight because, it wasn't that long ago when real yields were deeply negative. So I think that's where we are at the moment.
And that's a big shift. If we remind everybody that we were in negative territory, which kind of blew all of our minds, but you're right. Like if that move and that trajectory is pretty substantial. So, Molly, every time Jay Powell, I feel like, gets up there, though, and maybe less or so, but reminds us we're data dependent. So I do want to go back to the data. We get weekly jobless tomorrow, and I feel like that's more, real-time data, if you will, rather than, it's backward-looking, but not as backward as some of the data. And then, of course, we get the jobs report. So what are we anticipating? Is this, again, something that might just provide confirmation of the trends that we're seeing in the labor market, of things softening?
I would think so. I think just the one potential outlier for the payrolls number would be we're going to have, 40,000 United Auto workers who are back to working this month. So that was obviously a big detractor in October.
But don't the economists account for that?
Yes, but I don't know that people who trade treasuries do.
Well, they should listen to this show more. What'd you say, Michael?
Yeah, I think that's already in the price, I think.
Okay, well, there we go. But so that's one thing that I think could be maybe a bit of a head fake if you get a very strong payrolls number from the establishment survey. So that's the survey of businesses. I think maybe then the focus will then shift a bit more to the household survey. That's where we're going to see the unemployment rate, participation, and then there's a separate measure of payrolls from the household survey, which can often be quite different from what the business survey will say. So I think that could be interesting, and otherwise just the signals we've been getting from the real-time data. We've seen a really drastic rise in the number of continuing jobless claims in the past month.
Right.
So that's basically people who are continuously applying for unemployment benefits. Even though initial applications are still staying quite low, you're seeing the continuing claims number, that's up at the highest in, I think, 2 years.
So they're staying on benefit, they're getting benefits,
right,
they're not
exactly.
getting a job, they're not getting
so
off
that basically to us would say that for people who are out of work right now, it's harder to find a job. That would be more reflected in what you would think would be the unemployment rate.
Michael, the bond market does seem like we're settling in here, though, at these lower levels of range, if you will. Will we continue to trend there, bar anything but a real shocker on Friday when it comes to that monthly read on jobs? Is this kind of our range now?
Yes, it is. And I think if you do get any kind of strength or resiliency in the labour market data on Friday, you'll get a knee-jerk sell-off in yields. And then the key to watch is how quickly do buyers come in and where do they reload. And I don't think, again, a 425 on the 10, 430, that's probably where people are going to go, actually, that's on a historical basis looking back. Mm-hmm. That's still a pretty good yield if we go back over the last 15 years. So I think that's going to be one interesting tell. And as for the data itself, a lot of people looking at whether hours worked keep getting cut. The continuing claims is very important. So tomorrow, that'll again, if that comes in on that continual trend of heading higher, that's going to make the bond market feel pretty good that actually, notwithstanding what comes on Friday, there's sort of a sense here that they really want to see not just what happens from the November job report, what's December, what's January going to say, because at the end of the day, they're looking to head to March as being potentially the moment when you could start to see signs of a bigger deceleration. And that's kind of where they're looking at here. So it's more of you're sort of having to price the probabilities here.
Right.
And that's what the market does.
Michael, just 10 seconds, the top end for the 10-year at 5%. Is that the consensus?
So. It is very much the consensus. The Fed has peaked. And when the Fed normally has finished a hiking cycle, you peak, and then that's the peak. And that's what we've seen.
And let's not forget, it's a presidential election year. So the Fed's going to think about timing, right? Of not wanting to do...
It's not political.
Well, ideally, they won't think about politics, but...
Well, I mean, but...
Yeah, but...
Just saying.
Ideally.
All right, we got to run.
Sure.
Michael McKenzie, Molly Smith. Guys, thank you so much. This is Bloomberg.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
It's 3:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. Lows of the day right now on the S&P 500 index. 39 minutes to go ahead of the closing bell. Stocks lower. This update brought to you by Glen Mead. Glen Mead offers sophisticated wealth and investment management solutions combined with the personalized service you deserve. Your wealth, your mission, your investments. Let's talk. Visit glenmead.com to learn more. The Dow now lower by 32 points, down by about 0.1%. S&P 500 index at 4554, lower by 12, drop now of 0.3%. NASDAQ, the composite index, down 60 points, a decline there of 0.4%. Cannot ignore the Russell 2000 index, higher. Rest of the market is down. The Russell 2000 of small cap stocks up by about 0.1%. So we are looking at a down day here. The Dow, the S&P, and NASDAQ all declining. The rally in bonds around the world gaining further traction as soft economic readings in both the U.S. and Europe fuel speculation that major central banks will be cutting rates this year. Right now, we do have the 10-year at 4.12%, with a 2-year 4.16%. As for the market backdrop and the Federal Reserve, Subhadra Rajap is head of U.S. rate strategy at Societe Generale.
The easing of financial conditions just in the last 4 weeks is really helping the Fed perhaps be a little bit more at ease heading into the December meeting, given the fact that the data has also been softening ever so gradually in the fourth quarter.
And again, the 10-year now at 4.12%. Sources tell Bloomberg Apple, which is seeking to reverse a decline in Mac and iPad sales, is preparing several new models and upgrades for early next year. Our story based on reporting from our Mark Gurman. Again, we've got Apple lower now by 0.5%. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. You are listening and watching Bloomberg Business Week. So excited about our next guest. So much going on, as you know, at the intersection of sports, money, and education, which is why this next story, we're going to kind of start here, is on our radar. It's courtesy of Bloomberg's Jillian Tan. She reported last week on Patrick Company, which works with athletes and entrepreneurs to invest in private equity. The company, along with more than 50 of its current and former athlete clients, including Philadelphia Eagles center Jason Kelsey and
I've heard that last name before. Okay.
Jason Swift. Oh, wait, can I say that?
Jason's the cool one, right?
Jason's the cool one. You are hearing the voice of Mark Patrickoff, founder and CEO of Patrickoff Company, joining us here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio. Just so you know, you're here for the next 60 minutes. No, next time you're going to be here for the next 60 minutes.
Yeah, it's going to be like the
How are you?
third host of the show.
Coming to see you.
Well, we love.
This is an opt-in choice, not a you have to go do this choice.
Well, we love having you. First of all, tell us about this deal. IMG Academy, I wasn't that familiar. Did kind of a deep dive, but tell me why you guys are doing
I
this.
bet you loved tennis, though, years ago.
I love gymnastics. I was a gymnast.
Well, a little bit less, so, but relevant to IMG, although they have been gymnastics. But I remember when I was in high school, I had friends who, if they were really good tennis players, all they wanted to do was go to Nick Bollettieri in Tampa. Yes. And that is IMG Academy, by the way. So that evolved. Ultimately, IMG acquired Bollettieri, changed the name. And it's always been the preeminent place for, in some cases, privileged, but as it's changed, for underprivileged.
No, I mean,
and
Agassi didn't pay a dime to get
Yeah,
it.
exactly.
Yeah.
So on one hand, you kind of knew the brand. I did a lot of investment banking work for IMG when they were an independent agency. When Endeavor bought them, I stayed in close touch with IMG. Mubadala invested at the time. I was involved in that transaction. And one of the heads of the head of corp dev at Endeavor, a guy named Brent Richard, who was an old friend of mine. We've been on the opposite side of a couple of different banking deals. Ended up as part of his role in Endeavor, taking over this acquisition they had done with IMG and focusing on the academy and seeing a really big vision for for-profit education, democratizing, I think, access to the best coaching.
Well, yeah, I just wanted to jump in just because when you talk Bollettieri, it's funny, we did the U.S. Open this year, got super into tennis again, read Agassi's book. He talks about his experience at Bollettieri. One thing that he made
hate, probably, right?
Yeah, more hate than love, for sure.
But
especially, it totally worked.
That's right.
And Bollettieri for years was his coach.
Yeah.
But one thing that he talked about was academics, and that's in my experience too, with growing up in California and seeing other tennis academies, the tennis was great. Academics were lacking. Talk to me a little bit about IMG's
and I'm
approach to
going to do a
academics.
little, I will, and I'm sorry to interrupt you. I will do a little plug here, but it'll make sense in a second. I've been the chairman of the board of a charity in New York called New Heights Youth. It's a basketball-related charity, but we use academics as a benefit for getting good coaching. So we've sort of said, look, if you can be part of a team, if you can consistently commit to what's required to be on a team, you can do the same thing in the classroom. So if you want our coaching, we're going to force you into after-school programs, SAT prep, college, admissions process, help. So IMG has done that at a much greater scale in a for-profit way. So yes, academics is a story here today. Athletics is what has always been what people talked about, but it's the combination of the two that is really what's interesting here. So using sports as a hook to bring in kids, either underprivileged or privileged, put them into the right types of programs to professionalize in their minds how they take advantage of this physical skill they have off the court, off the field, and to have better, bigger, more fulfilling lives because of it. And there's proof points across the globe. So when IMG sold, itself, Endeavor sold IMG Academy to EQT, and Norda Anglais, the opportunity was here to globalize a really interesting methodology that has changed people's lives for many, many years. And Andre's a good example. He probably wouldn't be the Andre we know, Venus Williams, and the long list of people who have created discipline in their lives, learned how to exercise one muscle. If they can do that successfully, realize they can exercise their intellectual muscles too. And IMG is a really phenomenal, I think, academic process to do that.
And the assumption isn't that everybody's going to become this big professional athlete, but it's just
very few make it to the pros.
like kind of like a great finishing boarding school, right?
Of course. I mean, it's one way of looking at it. I mean, at New Heights, IMG too, if 5% of these kids go and play some level of professional sports. Remember, professional sports, take basketball, it isn't just the NBA. There's leagues in Italy and France and Greece and Israel and many other places. Brazil, great players coming from all over the world now. So that's the other opportunity here with IMG Academy, and why they chose EQT and why we could be helpful is there's a real opportunity to globalize this.
Speaking of globalization, God, there's so many places I want to go with you. PGA and LIV, they're supposed to, I think, there's a deadline at the end of this year for this merger.
I think we talked about it this spring as if it was a done deal already.
Yeah, it's tick, 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 tick. It's coming, or it's expected to. What do you think happens next?
I don't know. I mean, it's very hard to say. I think it's been...
Is this a good thing?
Absolutely. Look, I think anytime people have an opportunity to be paid fairly for their talent is a good thing. So if it's one league, clearly, that caps to some extent what someone can make. I think competition ultimately is a good thing.
Yeah.
I think the way it's been managed has been quite poor. I'm really pretty certain that the JP Morgans of the world, who happen to own, here, just in full disclosure, 20% of my business.
Yeah.
But who are the biggest sponsors of the U.S. Open, for example? I'm sure they were, and by the way, the Masters and other things like that. I'm sure they had a loud voice when this fell upon us in the spring. So, I think it's a good thing if it helps, democratize golf, so more people play golf, more people see golf, more people attend golf tournaments. I mean, it's been for the privileged few who get to go to see the Masters or go, watch any of these tournaments. And I hope something good comes of it. I mean, I think TQL is interesting, which is the new indoor league. We'll see if that just got delayed. It's an interesting way to take a sport that's been for very few people who could afford it. So if LIV and PGA come together, you have to see what that means.
TBD.
Yeah.
Hey, listen, we've only got a couple minutes, so you've got to already promise to come back really soon.
Always.
But 2 minutes, the world's pretty stressful, to say the least. And who'd have thought, just kind of this year, the stuff that we were talking about seeing, living. Athletes, what's their role in all of this? And we're getting ready for a really important presidential election in the United States. What's their role, or should be their role, where it can backfire in an instant?
Used to be, I think, in the locker rooms of the old days, you didn't talk about money, you didn't talk about sex, and you didn't talk about politics. I think in the last cycle of professional sports, where these kids are seeing the world in a very different way. They're learning more by accident or intentionally at a much younger age. They are forming opinions. They're realizing the power of their brains. Back to IMG Academy. And I speak to athletes, most cases 7 days a week. They'll bring up, what do you think is going to happen next November? I don't like this candidate. I do like that candidate. And they're starting to understand that if they decide to amplify a point of view that's well-informed, that could be influential. I mean, not to make it about diversity, but you think about Obama and Oprah and the impact she had. The number one, I'm going to use this example because it's kind of off point for the US, but the number one cricket player in India has 250 million Instagram followers. I don't have offhand how many Instagram followers Joe Burrow has or Kyrie Irving, but you saw what Kyrie Irving did last fall.
Right.
They can make a difference. And if athlete A doesn't want to see Donald Trump become president, he or she has a voice. And I think you're going to see a willingness that you did not see in the past, other than from a very select few, to use that voice to, I think, a positive end. And any opinion's a good opinion. I always say that about athletes. And, just have an opinion. I don't care whether you go left or right or do this deal, don't do this deal. I just want you to have an opinion. So we say that a lot to them about politics. Have an opinion. It matters. It's going to affect your lives.
As I said, promise to come back soon, because we'll do more. We will, obviously. Mark Patrikoff, President and CEO of Patrikoff Company, joining us here in studio.
Hey, let's get a check on the latest world of national news. Nancy Lyons in the 99 newsroom in Washington, D.C. Hey, Nance.
Thanks, Tim. Some breaking news here. Las Vegas police officers are responding to a confirmed active shooter in a building on the campus of the University of Nevada. In a social media post, the school writes, "This is not a test. Run, hide, fight." Those are the words often taught for dealing with an active shooter. This is apparently happening at the school's Beam Hall, the home of the business school. Police are saying there do appear to be multiple victims. Also in Nevada this afternoon, a grand jury has indicted 6 Republicans who were so-called fake electors who allegedly were on standby to falsely declare Donald Trump the winner of the 2020 election. The 6 signed certificates falsely stating Trump had won the state and sent those certificates to Congress and the National Archives. President Biden says he's not ready to walk away from Ukraine, and he's challenging Congress not to walk away either. A Senate vote on Biden's supplemental request for aid to Ukraine and Israel is set for later today.
Make no mistake, today's vote's going to be long remembered, and history's going to judge harshly those who turn their back on freedom's cause. We can't let Putin win. Say it again, we can't let Putin win.
Biden says the failure to approve aid to Ukraine would be the greatest gift the U.S. could give to Russia. The Justice Department says it has filed war crime charges against 4 members of the Russian military who are accused of abducting and torturing an American who was living in Ukraine. Attorney General Merrick Garland with more.
The charges include conspiracy to commit war crimes, including war crimes outlawed by the international community after World War II, unlawful confinement, torture, and inhuman treatment.
Garland says the American was beaten and interrogated while being held for 10 days at a Russian military compound. And we've just received word in Las Vegas. The police say the suspect there has been contained. Global News, 24 hours a day.
updates, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
It's 3:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We are looking at a wave of selling into the close. Let's head right over to the first word breaking news desk for today's afternoon call. Here he is, Bill Maloney.
And good afternoon, Charlie. U.S. stocks have given up their early gains, with the Dow now down 72 points, S&P's dropped 16, and NASDAQ declines by 0.5%. The U.S. 10-year yield falls to 4.12%. Gold is up 8. Oil is sinking, and Bitcoin is higher by 0.3%. Among the main 11 S&P sectors, leaders were utilities and the industrials. Energy and tech were under pressure, and leaders to the upside in the Dow, Walgreens and 3M, while American Express and Intel led to the downside. In other news, McDonald's targets their expansion to 50,000 restaurants by the end of 2027, and after earnings, Toll Brothers rose as much as 4.5% to an all-time high. Wrapping things up, some of the names pointing after the bell tonight include C3 AI, Chewy, and GameStop. Live from the first breaking news desk, I'm Bill Maloney. Charlie?
Okay, we thank you very much, Bill Maloney. And to hear live breaking news over your Bloomberg, type Squawk, SQUA, on your Bloomberg terminal. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
I'm driving in my car. I turn on the radio.
How about you let me drive?
Oh, no. Who's gonna drive you home? Honey, please, I'll do the driving. Drive on. Excuse me, I want to drive.
It's the question that drives us.
This is the Drive to the Close.
That funky music will drive us till the dawn.
On Bloomberg Radio.
All right, everybody. Just about 18 minutes left in today's trading session. Yeah, we're at our lows of the day when it comes to the equity trade.
Yeah, but as we just heard from Bill Maloney, we saw early gains in the day. It's kind of an interesting move, right? If you go to HCPI-D on the Bloomberg terminal, you can see that S&P 500 was up as much as 0.5 percentage point early in the session. Lows of the day, about 0.4%. So, quite a bit of move.
Yeah, that was then. That's not now, though.
Yeah, you're right.
Just giving you a hard time.
Someone's already on vacation.
I'm just a little surly. All right, so let's get to it, because our next guest expects 2 to 3 rate cuts in the new year. With more on her thinking and what that may portend for U.S. stocks, it's time for the drive to the close. Nadia Lovell is with us. She's Senior U.S. Equity Strategist at UBS Global Wealth Management, and she's with us on Zoom in New York City. Nadia, how are you?
I am well. How are you?
I'm doing okay, doing well. Ready to kind of put a bow on this year, to be quite honest. It's been dense. It's been a lot of stuff, a lot of big stories, and a lot of twists and turns and volatility for investors to deal with. So let's get to your premise, your macro environment for the U.S. equity market. 2 to 3 rate cuts a year. Why and when do you anticipate that they might come through?
We think that actually won't come through until the middle of the year. We actually think that the market current pricing is a bit aggressive. We've seen this massive pendulum swing to dovish a bit too quickly from our hard pivot from higher for longer. And now the market is pricing in over 130 basis points for cuts next year. I mean, even Chairman Powell tried to push back on this last week, even though a bit unsuccessful. But we think that the Fed is going to remain patient. We should start to see inflation moderate further in the first